Hey there, tonight we're diving into the whispers of the ancient Roman roads, where the truth is these cobblestone arteries stretched over 250,000 miles, connecting an empire long before GPS. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. The Industrial Revolution, where steam engines roared to life and dreams of progress chugged full steam ahead. But before you get too starry-eyed envisioning a world of gleaming machines and bustling factories, let's peel back the curtain for a reality check. We're in the late 18th century, a time when the word revolution hardly meant waving flags and freedom speeches. Instead, it was all about gears and grease, as steam-powered wonders started to reshape the landscape. This wasn't just about inventing cool gadgets. It was an economic earthquake that split open the ground beneath society's feet. By the early 1800s, the production of cotton had skyrocketed. Britain alone was producing over 500 million pounds of cotton annually. That's more than enough fabric to fashion a toga for every statue in ancient Rome, if you're keeping score. Factories sprouted like mushrooms after a rainstorm, and with them came the promise of job opportunities, or so the brochures would have you believe. Sure, industrialists were swimming in profits like Scrooge McDuck in his money bin, but the average worker was more likely drowning in a sea of soot and sweat. The myth of glorious progress painted factories as temples of innovation. In reality, they were more like purgatories of perpetual toil. Let's talk about those grimy factories for a moment. Picture vast halls echoing with the clatter of machinery, where workers toiled away 14-hour shifts under dim, flickering lamps. Safe working conditions. Oh, those were still decades away, my friend. A factory worker's life was a symphony of clanking metals and clashing gears, all wrapped in a cloud of thick, unbreathable air. And who could forget the perennial stench of progress, smoke and sweat, with a hint of despair? Now, onto one of history's darkest sleight-of-hand tricks, child labor. While the Industrial Revolution's marketing team might have left this part out, kids as young as 6 were getting a crash course in the importance of a strong work ethic. Forget school. They were too busy dodging spinning machines in textile mills. By 1833, children made up nearly 29% of the workforce in British factories. Yes, you heard right. Almost a third of workers were barely old enough to read. But why dwell on such grim realities when there's urban sprawl to romanticize? Cities ballooned like they'd just been inflated with a bicycle pump. London's population, for example, doubled between 1801 and 1851. That's a lot of folks crammed into narrow, soot-covered streets, living in close quarters that made a sardine can look spacious. As appealing as it sounds, this urban expansion was less about the joys of modern city life and more about the gritty grind of survival. Of course, the myth of glorious progress was a convenient narrative for those reaping the benefits. It's easier to sell the dream of a brighter future when you're not the one shoveling coal into the fire. But in reality, the revolution was a double-edged sword. On one side, innovation and economic growth; on the other, a stark reminder that not everyone was invited to the victory parade. So next time someone waxes poetic about the Industrial Revolution's wonders, remember the folks who lived through its less glamorous side. It was a world where child labor was the norm, workdays stretched into eternity, and the air was thick with more than just the promise of a better tomorrow. As history has taught us, every revolution has its costs, and the industrial one came with a hefty price tag. But let's put on our steel-toed boots and stomp into the gritty aftermath of this industrial whirlwind. As smoke billowed and gears ground on, a new social class emerged from the soot, the working class. And I'm not talking about a weekend warriors club. These were the real deal, the folks who made sure the machine of progress didn't seize up like a rusty cog. They were the backbone of industry, yet found themselves with neither wealth nor power to show for it. Talk about a raw deal. In those dimly lit factories, the seeds of social upheaval were sown. Workers were tired of being treated like replaceable parts in some monstrous machine, so they decided to crank up the volume and demand something more. Enter stage left, Labor unions. The birth of these organizations was no easy labor itself. Think of it as trying to organize a dance party in a library while the stern librarian keeps shushing you. Employers were the librarians of this analogy, and they weren't fond of the noise. The first murmurs of collective action began in the early 19th century. Spurred by shared grievances, workers started to realize that maybe, just maybe, they were stronger together. In 1824, Britain repealed the Combination Acts, which had effectively outlawed trade unions, and suddenly the working class had a legal platform. By the 1830, unions were sprouting faster than weeds in a neglected garden. Yet these were no garden variety organizations. They were the lifelines for men, women, and yes, even children stuck in the grind. Speaking of kids, let's talk about one of the most absurd realities of this era: child labor in coal mines. Picture a 6-year-old wielding a shovel instead of a toy, navigating dark, treacherous tunnels. It's as if someone took "Bring your kid to work day" and stretched it into a childhood sentence. Coal mines were particularly notorious for exploiting young labor. By the 1840, reforms began to chip away at this practice, but it was a stubborn stain that took decades to scrub out. Meanwhile, the romanticized rags to riches tales were spinning yarns more tangled than a cat's plaything. Sure, Horatio Alger was writing page-turners about pluck and luck, but the truth was grimmer. The odds of climbing the social ladder were slim, as slippery as a greased pole. Wages for factory workers were often a pittance, a few shillings a week by the mid-19th century, barely enough to keep the wolf from the door, let alone buy the sheep's clothing. Now, let's tear the veil off this romanticism with cold, hard figures. In 1842, the average life expectancy of a laborer in urban Manchester was a dismal 17 years. Yes, you read that right, 17. The air was so thick with pollution, you could practically chew it. And housing, well, it made a sardine can look like a penthouse. Families crammed into tiny, unsanitary quarters, often sharing space with critters that had no intention of paying rent. But despite these harsh realities, the working class wasn't about to roll over without a fight. They rallied, organized, and demanded change with the kind of persistence that would make a bulldog proud. The Chartist movement of the 1830 and 1840 pushed for political reforms, like the right to vote for all men, not just the elite. They might not have succeeded in their time, but they sowed seeds for future generations to reap. It's worth pausing here to appreciate the sheer tenacity of these individuals. They were like the unsung heroes of a battle hymn, fighting for a voice in a world that seemed determined to silence them. And while their story might not have the glamour of a Hollywood script, it's a testament to the power of collective action and the unyielding human spirit. So, as we ponder the Industrial Age's legacy, it's clear that it wasn't just about steam and steel. It was about people, real, breathing, struggling people, who laid the groundwork for the rights and freedoms many of us enjoy today. This struggle was the catalyst for monumental change, a shift from the shadows of industrial exploitation into the sunlight of social justice. But hold on, we're not done yet. This is just the opening act in a long play of social transformation. As we continue to unravel the threads of this historical tapestry, remember, every revolution has its price, and the industrial one was no different. Stay tuned for more as we delve deeper into the echoes of this upheaval, where the fight for equality and fairness is far from over. As we continue our journey through the smog-filled streets of the Industrial Revolution, it's time to shift gears and take a closer look at the technological marvels that were cranking the world into a new age. Hold onto your top hats, folks, because we're diving headfirst into the world of gizmos and gadgets that promised progress, but often delivered a mixed bag of consequences. Let's kick things off with the carton gin, a deceptively simple contraption invented by Lee Whitney in 1793. Picture a wooden box with a crank and some wire teeth, its simplicity belying the massive upheaval it would unleash. This little machine could clean as much carton in a single day as 50 laborers could by hand. That's right, 50. Talk about a productivity boost that would make any modern CEO drool. But with great power comes great responsibility, or in this case, great exploitation. The carton gin didn't just speed up production, it supercharged the demand for slave labor in the American South. By the mid-1800s, cotton became king, accounting for over half of U.S. exports. Plantations expanded like ballooning soufflés, and with them, the brutal institution of slavery grew ever more entrenched. So, while the gin was a triumph of engineering, it was also a catalyst for deepening social and economic divides. Moving right along, let's tune into the telegraph, the 19th century equivalent of a tweet, albeit a bit less pithy. Samuel Morse, the maestro behind this innovation, sent the first successful message in 1844. What hath God wrought? A fitting question, as the telegraph would go on to shrink the world faster than you can say lol. By the 1860, a web of telegraph wires crisscrossed continents, zapping information at lightning speed over thousands of miles. Now, you might think this was the dawn of a global village, but hold your horses. While the telegraph did connect the world, it also amplified existing power imbalances. It allowed empires to tighten their grip on far-flung colonies, with orders zipping back and forth like digital whip cracks. The British Empire, for example, used the telegraph to manage its sprawling dominions more efficiently, a fact that surely kept colonial subjects tossing and turning at night. And here's the kicker. While the telegraph revolutionized communication, it also put a lot of people out of work. Those quaint messenger boys, once the lifeblood of urban communication, suddenly found themselves obsolete, casualties of progress with nothing but their caps and a dismal job market. Sure, the telegraph was a technological wonder, but it also left a trail of economic disruption in its wake. Speaking of disruption, let's not forget the darker side of these innovations. Environmental damage, a topic that tends to get swept under the rug like dust at a Victorian tea party. Coal-powered factories belched smoke into the skies, while rivers of waste turned waterways into toxic soup. The Thames in London was famously dubbed the Great Stink in the 1850, a delightful moniker that captured the essence of industrial pollution. It was so bad that Parliament had to shut its windows to escape the stench. Talk about a breath of fresh air, or the lack thereof. And here's where things get really murky. While industrial giants were busy counting their profits, the natural world was footing the bill. Deforestation, soil depletion, and air pollution were just a few of the environmental hangovers from this era of unchecked progress. The myth of endless resources and boundless growth was a convenient story for those at the top, but it was nature, and eventually everyone else, that would pay the price. But wait, there's more. As industrial giants expanded their empires, they cast their eyes beyond their borders, looking for new lands to exploit. Colonialism was the name of the game, and the rules were anything but fair. European powers carved up Africa and Asia like a Sunday roast, extracting resources and labor with little regard for the consequences. The wealth flowed back to the metropoles, leaving a trail of economic inequality and social upheaval in its wake. Take India, for instance, a jewel in the British crown that was, in reality, a wellspring of resources for the empire. The British East India Company, a corporate behemoth in its day, plundered the subcontinent with ruthless efficiency. By the late 19th century, Britain was importing millions of pounds of Indian cotton annually, all while crippling local industries with high tariffs and unfair competition. It was a classic case of heads I win, tails you lose, with India on the losing end. This economic exploitation wasn't just a footnote. It was the driving force behind the industrial machine. The riches of the colonies funded further technological advancement, creating a vicious cycle where progress for some meant hardship for many. The narrative of progress equals prosperity was a convenient tale spun by those cashing in on the status quo. So, what's the takeaway? While the Industrial Revolution was indeed a time of remarkable innovation, it was also a period of profound inequality and environmental degradation. The technological wonders that promised to lift humanity to new heights often did so on the backs of the marginalized and at the expense of the planet. As we wrap up this chapter in our story, it's important to remember that history is more than just a series of dates and inventions. It's a complex tapestry woven from the threads of human ambition, greed, and resilience. The Industrial Revolution was a time of great change, but it was also a stark reminder that not all progress is created equal. As we pause here, consider the echoes of this era that still resonate today. The lessons of the past are never truly behind us, and the story of progress is one that continues to unfold. Stay tuned as we venture further into the labyrinth of history, where more twists and turns await. And so we march on, from the cacophony of clanking machines and coal-dusted dreams, straight into the ideological maelstrom that the Industrial Revolution stirred up. Let's dive into the political soup of the 19th century, where ideologies like Marxism simmered alongside capitalism's growing pains, each promising solutions to the woes of a rapidly changing world. First up, Marxism, the intellectual brainchild of Karl Marx and his trusty sidekick, Friedrich Engels. These two were less dynamic duo and more revolutionary tag team, penning the Communist Manifesto in 1848. Now, 1848 was quite the year for Europe, with revolutions popping up like daisies in a field of discontent. Marx and Engels saw the Industrial Revolution not as a triumph of human ingenuity, but as a monstrous machine that chewed up workers and spat out profits for the bourgeoisie. In their view, capitalism was a relentless beast, gobbling up resources and leaving inequality in its wake. Marx's vision was grand, a classless society where the workers of the world would unite, seizing the means of production and finally getting a slice of the pie they'd been baking all along. And while it sounds like the plot of a utopian novel, the reality was more complex. The ideas spread like wildfire, finding fertile ground among those who felt the sting of industrial capitalism's sharp edges. By 1867, Marx had published Das Kapital, a dense tome analyzing capitalism's inner workings with the precision of a watchmaker dissecting a malfunctioning timepiece. But let's not get carried away on the winds of revolutionary rhetoric. While Marxism promised liberation, it also carried with it the seeds of future turbulence. The 20th century would see Marxist ideas evolve into different strains, some of which would lead to authoritarian regimes that bore little resemblance to Marx's original vision. The irony was as thick as the smog that once enveloped London. An ideology born from a desire to free the oppressed sometimes ended up shackling them in new ways. Switching gears to capitalism, it was undergoing its own awkward adolescence during the Industrial Revolution. Sure, it had the swagger of a teenager who just discovered hair gel, but it was also grappling with issues that would make even the most seasoned economist wince. The boom and bust cycles of the market created an economic roller coaster with dizzying highs and stomach-churning lows. By the mid-19th century, financial crises were as common as rainy days in Manchester, complete with panicked investors and the occasional bank run. Take the panic of 1873, for instance. It started in Vienna with the collapse of a major bank and quickly spread across Europe and the United States faster than a rumor at a royal court. The resulting depression lasted 6 grueling years, a testament to capitalism's growing pains as it struggled to balance innovation with stability. This was the era when laissez-faire economics was the name of the game, where government intervention was seen as anathema to the free market's self-regulating magic. Spoiler alert, the magic often faltered, leaving workers to bear the brunt of its failures. But capitalism did have its cheerleaders, folks who believed in its power to lift people out of poverty and create prosperity. The Industrial Revolution had indeed birthed new industries and opportunities, but these were often reserved for those with the capital to invest, leaving a vast gap between the haves and have-nots. The myth of the self-made man gained traction, with the likes of Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller embodying the rags-to-riches dream. Yet, the reality was that these titans of industry often built their empires on the backs of exploited labor. Let's not forget the political power shifts that came with these economic transformations. The old aristocracy, with its powdered wigs and land-based wealth, found itself in an uncomfortable dance with the rising class of industrialists. Wealth was no longer tied solely to land and titles, but to factories and innovation. This shift in power dynamics was like a grand game of musical chairs, with new players vying for a seat at the table of influence. The British Parliament, for instance, saw a gradual shift as industrialists and businessmen began to wield political clout, challenging the traditional landed gentry. Internationally, the diplomatic stage was just as bustling. The concert of Europe, a post-Napoleonic alliance designed to keep the peace, was more like a delicate waltz on a floor of marbles. Nations smiled and shook hands at the negotiating table, but behind those diplomatic grins were simmering tensions. The industrial arms race was on, with countries eager to flex their newfound technological muscle. By the late 19th century, the military-industrial complex was gathering steam, a harbinger of the global conflicts to come. And here's where irony takes center stage. The very technologies that promised peace and prosperity, like the telegraph and railways, also laid the groundwork for modern warfare. The telegraph enabled rapid mobilization of troops, while railways allowed for the swift movement of armies. In a twist worthy of a Greek tragedy, innovations that could have united humanity often ended up dividing it further. As we peel back the layers of this historical onion, it's clear that the Industrial Revolution was more than just a period of technological advancement. It was a crucible of social, economic, and political change, where ideologies clashed like titans in a tempest. The promises of progress were real, but so were the pitfalls, and the world was left to navigate the complex terrain between them. So, as we wrap up this leg of our journey, remember that the story isn't over yet. The Industrial Revolution was just the opening act in a much larger drama, one that continues to unfold in the corridors of power and the streets of our cities. Stay tuned for more as we delve deeper into this historical epic, where the echoes of the past still resonate with the challenges of today. And so, with the Industrial Revolution's grand stage set, we find ourselves on the precipice of its enduring legacy, where the curtain rises on modern conveniences and climate challenges, intertwined in a dance of irony and consequence. The 19th century industrialists dreamed of a world transformed by steam and steel, but the reality is a tale of progress peppered with potholes, some big enough to swallow whole economies. Let's kick things off by acknowledging the undeniable perks of the Industrial Revolution. Modern conveniences that revolutionized daily life. Take the humble light bulb, for instance. Thomas Edison's 1879 invention quite literally illuminated society, banishing the shadows of night with a flick of a switch. Fast forward to today, and we're surrounded by a constellation of gadgets that were once the stuff of science fiction. Smartphones, microwaves, cars, you name it, all have roots tracing back to this era of relentless innovation. Yet, for every technological marvel, there's a shadow lurking behind the bright lights. Enter climate change, the elephant in the room that's grown too big to ignore. The Industrial Revolution set off a carbon chain reaction, a fossil-fueled frenzy that pumped greenhouse gases into the atmosphere like it was going out of style. By 1950, global CO2 emissions had skyrocketed to about 6 billion metric tons annually, a figure that would give any environmentalist heart palpitations. It's a classic case of unintended consequences, where the quest for progress sparked a climate conundrum that's still unfolding today. But let's not just wag our fingers at the past without appreciating the nuances. It's easy to romanticize the idea of inevitable progress, to picture a straight upward trajectory toward a utopian future. Yet, history is less a smooth path and more a roller coaster with its fair share of dizzying drops and stomach-churning loops. Take the Great Depression of the 1930, for instance, a stark reminder that economic growth can quickly become economic collapse. Unemployment in the United States soared to 25%, and global trade plummeted by more than 60%. Progress, it turns out, isn't guaranteed. It's more like a house of cards, susceptible to the slightest breeze. And while we're debunking myths, let's address the notion that technological advancement inevitably leads to societal harmony. The digital age, for instance, has brought about unprecedented connectivity and communication. Yet, it's also widened the chasm between the digital haves and have-nots. As of 2021, nearly 3 billion people worldwide still lacked access to the internet, a sobering statistic in our hyper-connected era. The digital divide is a modern reflection of the societal divides that the Industrial Revolution helped to forge, a reminder that technology can both unite and divide. Now, let's take a detour into the realm of social justice, where the echoes of the Industrial Revolution still resonate. The labor movements that gained traction in the 19th century laid the groundwork for modern workers' rights, but the struggle for equality is far from over. The gender pay gap, for example, remains a stubborn fixture in the workforce. In 2020, Women in the United States earned 84 cents for every dollar earned by men, a statistic that would likely have raised the eyebrows of our industrial ancestors. Progress, it seems, is often a game of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. As we wrap up this whirlwind tour through history's industrial chapter, it's worth taking a moment to appreciate the resilience of the human spirit, a force as powerful as any steam engine. Humanity's ability to adapt, to rise from the ashes of setbacks, and to innovate in the face of challenges is nothing short of remarkable. The Industrial Revolution, with all its trials and triumphs, is a testament to that resilience. It's a story of trial and error, of dreams realized and dreams deferred, of a world forever changed by the relentless march of progress. So as you reflect on this era, remember that history isn't just a sequence of events. It's a living, breathing narrative shaped by the choices and actions of countless individuals. It's a saga of ambition and adversity, of hope and hubris. And as we continue to navigate the complexities of the modern world, the lessons of the Industrial Revolution remind us that while progress is possible, it's never without its challenges. The narrative of history is still being written, and it's up to us to ensure that the next chapters are ones of balance, sustainability, and inclusivity. And there you have it, folks, the Industrial Revolution, in all its gritty glory and complex contradictions. A testament to human ingenuity and a cautionary tale of its excesses. So next time you flip a light switch or scroll through your smartphone, take a moment to ponder the tangled web of history that brought us here. After all, the past may be behind us, but its echoes continue to shape our present and our future. Stay curious, stay critical, and remember, history is one long, complicated story of trial and error, and we're all playing our part in its unfolding drama. The sun creeps over the horizon, casting its golden glow on the sprawling expanse of the Ottoman Empire. You're not just waking up in any old empire. You're in the realm where falconry is as prestigious as owning a fleet of Lamborghinis today. And if you think that's an exaggeration, let's dive into the fascinating world where birds of prey are the ultimate status symbols. As you stretch and shake off sleep, consider this. Falconry wasn't just a pleasant pastime for the Ottoman elite. It was their way of asserting dominance, of whispering to the world that they had arrived. If you were a sultan with a falcon perched proudly on your arm, you were basically flaunting a high-speed jet. Why? Because these birds weren't just about the thrill of the hunt. They were living, breathing emblems of power and privilege, and owning them wasn't cheap. Forget birdseed. These creatures demanded a fortune to maintain. First, let's talk numbers. Keeping a falcon in the Ottoman Empire was no small feat. Not when you consider that a single peregrine falcon, a favorite among the Ottomans, could cost the equivalent of what a middle-class family might earn in a year. And that's just for the bird itself. Factor in the cost of food, care, and those all-important handlers, and you're looking at a serious financial commitment. These handlers, by the way, were like the personal trainers of the bird world, ensuring the falcon stayed in peak condition. Forget your gym membership. This was the real deal. Now, you might be wondering why anyone would go to such lengths for a bird. It's simple. In a world where power was displayed as much by what you owned as what you conquered, owning a falcon was akin to owning a piece of the sky. It was a way of saying, I am master of the earth and the air. And for the Ottoman sultans, who ruled over a vast and diverse empire, this was no small claim. But let's not romanticize too quickly. The reality was that falconry was a game of high stakes. These birds weren't just pets, they were investments. If a sultan's falcon failed to impress on a hunt, it wasn't just a personal disappointment, it was a public failure. Imagine the pressure of having your social standing tied to the performance of a feathered hunter. The stakes were as high as the birds flew, and those handlers we mentioned, they weren't just glorified bird watchers, known as falconers. They were skilled professionals, often more revered than the warriors of the time. Training a falcon required patience, expertise, and a deep understanding of both the bird and the hunt. It was a job that combined art and science, much like training an Olympic athlete. And while the falconer's role might sound glamorous, it was also grueling work. Hours were spent ensuring the falcons were in perfect condition, ready to soar at a moment's notice. So, as you sip your morning coffee, or perhaps something a bit more traditional for the time, like a rich, spiced tea, consider the life of a sultan starting his day. He might be thinking about the state of his empire, the next diplomatic move, or perhaps, most importantly, whether his prized falcon would outshine the others in the hunt later that day. Because in the Ottoman Empire, falconry was more than a symbol of status. It was a way of life, woven into the very fabric of power and prestige. And there you are, standing at the threshold of a day that promises more than just the ordinary tasks of ruling. It's a day where the falcon's flight is as much a part of empire building as the latest treaty or military campaign. It's a day where the skies above are just another arena for the Game of Thrones. So, as the morning unfolds, keep your eyes on the skies. After all, in the Ottoman Empire, the falcon is truly king of the... As the morning sun stretches its rays over the Ottoman landscape, you find yourself stepping into the bustling heart of a falconry court. It's a scene straight out of a medieval management seminar, only instead of PowerPoints, you've got falcons, and instead of suits, enter the Bazdars, the falcon whisperers. These guys aren't just bird handlers. They're the elite of the elite, the kind of folks who, in today's world, would walk into a room and make hedge fund managers sweat. And why wouldn't they? These Bazdars underwent training as intense as a medieval MBA, minus the spreadsheets, but plus a whole lot of bird charisma. You see, becoming a Bazdar wasn't just about knowing how to keep a bird on your arm without losing a finger. It was about mastering the art of falconry, understanding the delicate dance between man and nature, and occasionally managing the egos of both. Their training covered everything from bird psychology. Yes, that's a thing, to the logistics of a successful hunt, which could rival any military operation of the time. In fact, these falconers held a level of political clout that would make today's presidential advisors look like interns fetching coffee. The Sultan trusted them more than most of his court, and for a good reason. After all, a Bazdar's ability to train and handle a falcon could directly impact the Sultan's reputation. If the bird performed well, it wasn't just a win for the hunt, it was a win for the empire's prestige. And if it didn't, well, heads could literally roll, and not just the bird's prey. Now, let's clear up a common misconception. These birds weren't just swooping in on command like some kind of feathered drones. It wasn't a matter of pressing a button and watching them dive bomb a target with precision. No, there was a whole lot of art, patience, and a dash of good old-fashioned luck at play here. Training a falcon required a relationship. Think more best friends who occasionally fight than master and pet. These birds had personalities, and boy, could they be divas. Sometimes they just decide it was a no-fly day, leaving the Bazdars to resort to all sorts of cajoling to get them back on track. Imagine trying to convince a teenager to get off the couch, and you'll have a decent idea of the struggle. Economically speaking, the falconry business was no joke. We're talking investments that could rival the GDP of a small country. It took resources to feed these high-flying hunters. Quails, pigeons, and sometimes even rabbits were on the menu. And don't forget the falcon's entourage of caretakers, trainers, and occasionally a medieval vet. This wasn't just a hobby. It was an entire industry, with the Bazdars at its helm. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of it all. Sure, the image of a sultan with a falcon on his arm is iconic, but the reality could be as gritty as it was glamorous. These birds could be unpredictable, and a failed hunt could spell disaster for a Bazdar's career. One wrong move, and you could find yourself out of a job, or worse. In a world where reputation was everything, a falcon's failure could lead to a rapid fall from grace. Yet for all the risks, the rewards were equally great. A successful hunt could elevate a Bazdar's status, earning him wealth, influence, and perhaps even the ear of the Sultan himself. It was a career built on the edge of a knife, where the stakes were as high as the falcons flew. And as you walk through this vibrant ecosystem, you realize that in the Ottoman Empire, falconry was more than just a sport or a symbol of status. It was a microcosm of power dynamics, a high-stakes game where the players had feathers. The outcomes could shape the fortunes of men. So, as the morning progresses and the falcons begin their aerial ballet, you find yourself caught between the legend and the harsh reality. It's a world where the skies are both a stage and a battlefield, where each flight is a test of skill, patience, and sometimes sheer luck. And while the birds may be the stars, it's the Bazdars who orchestrate this grand performance, ensuring that in the Ottoman Empire, the falcon remains king of the air. While the falcons might be getting all the glory, let's not forget the behind-the-scenes chaos that makes this medieval air show possible. Picture it as a logistical ballet, performed without the safety net of modern conveniences. Forget GPS. This is the era of maps and compasses, and just getting to the hunting grounds could be an epic saga in itself. But nothing screams Ottoman efficiency quite like the meticulous planning that goes into a falconry hunt. First up, the distance to the hunting grounds. We're not talking a quick jaunt down the road. These hunts could take you several miles away from the comforts of the palace. Think of it as a royal road trip, minus the snacks and Spotify playlists. The entourage, comprising the Sultan, his court, and a veritable army of attendants, had to move in a coordinated fashion. Imagine if moving your family for Thanksgiving involved packing up half the neighborhood, and the stakes were high. Falconers had to account for every possible hiccup, from weather changes to bird whims. It was a bit like planning a wedding, only with more feathers and fewer drunk uncles. Then comes the careful selection of falcons. This isn't some random pick-a-bird-from-a-hat affair. Each falcon had its strengths, and matching them to the right type of prey was crucial. Peregrine falcons, for instance, were the speedsters, diving at over 200 miles per hour to snatch mid-air meals. It was like choosing between a Formula One car and a dune buggy, depending on whether you were after quail or rabbits. Every falcon had its day, and understanding which bird would excel at which task was an art all its own. Talk about bird matchmaking. And if you thought the logistics ended there, think again. The hunt itself was a social event, a sort of Renaissance fair with a dash of Machiavellian politics. Imagine a networking event where the business cards are made of feathers, and the main topic of conversation is who's got the superior bird. It wasn't just about catching prey. It was about catching the attention of potential allies and enemies alike. A well-executed hunt could seal political alliances faster than you can say diplomatic dinner. Speaking of dinners, no Ottoman falconry event will be complete without a feast fit for a sultan. Picture sumptuous spreads of roasted meats, exotic fruits, and sweets that would make Willy Wonka green with envy. These gatherings were the original power lunches, where deals were brokered over platters of pilaf and cups of sherbet. The food wasn't just fuel. It was a statement of wealth and power, a way to impress guests and rivals alike. It was a culinary arms race, and the stakes were as high as the falcons flew. But let's reel it back to reality for a moment. For all its grandeur, organizing a falconry hunt was no walk in the park. It required a level of precision and foresight that could rival today's top CEOs. Every detail had to be perfect, from the bird's readiness to the state of the hunting grounds. One misstep, and the whole operation could come crashing down faster than a falcon on an empty stomach. It was the kind of high-pressure scenario that could turn even the most seasoned Bazdar into a bundle of nerves. Economically, the whole shebang was a drain on resources that could fund a small army. Feeding not just the falcons, but also the human entourage was no small feat. And let's not forget the cost of maintaining the birds. Those quails and rabbits didn't just appear magically. The falconry budget was a line item that could make even the most lavish court accountant break out in a cold sweat. And yet, it was all worth it for the Sultan who needed to project power and maintain influence. So, as the midday sun casts its golden glow over the hunting grounds, you can almost hear the hum of anticipation. It's a scene where every element, from the flight of the falcons to the clinking of goblets, plays a part in a grand tapestry of power, politics, and prestige. While the birds may be the stars of the show, it's the human drama unfolding beneath the surface that truly captivates. In the Ottoman Empire, falconry was more than just a pastime. It was a spectacle of empire, a dance of dominance played out in the skies above and the feasts below. And as the day unfolds, you realize that this ancient sport was as much about human ambition as it was about avian prowess. It was a world where the skies were a stage for imperial gamesmanship, where every flight of a falcon was a testament to the intricate dance of politics and power. So, as you find yourself amidst this swirling maelstrom of feathers and feasts, remember, in the Ottoman Empire, even the smallest bird could shape the destiny of men and empires alike. As the sun begins its slow descent, casting a warm, golden hue over the Ottoman landscape, the spectacle of falconry takes on a new dimension, a cultural tapestry woven as much from the threads of art and literature as from the feathers of the birds themselves. You might think falconry was just the ancient equivalent of a fancy Instagram post, but it was so much more than that. It was a cultural icon, a muse for poets and painters, and yes, sometimes a piece of well-crafted propaganda. Now, let's dig into some primary sources to see how this all plays out. The Ottoman Empire wasn't short on admirers, or critics, for that matter. Travelogues from the era read like Yelp reviews of the imperial court, with falconry often getting a 5-star rating. Evliya Çelebi, the famed 17th-century Ottoman traveler, wrote about the opulence of the Sultan's hunts, painting a picture as vivid as a Netflix series, described the falconry events as grandiose affairs, where the birds' aerial acrobatics were matched only by the sumptuousness of the feasts that followed. And then there were the poets, who had a field day with falconry. Picture this, a sultan's falcon soaring high in the sky, a symbol of unbridled power and majesty. It's not hard to see why poets like Baki would wax lyrical about these birds, often using them as metaphors for divine favor or the sultan's boundless reach. In verses that could make even the most hardened cynic swoon, falcons were depicted as celestial creatures, messengers between heaven and earth. But here's the kicker. While the poetry was beautiful, it was also strategic. By aligning falconry with the divine, poets were essentially giving the sultan's pastimes a celestial stamp of approval. Yet, not everyone was entranced by falconry's charms. Some contemporaries viewed it with a skeptical eye, seeing it as an extravagant waste of resources. After all, those lavish hunts and feasts didn't come cheap. Critics questioned the empire's priorities, arguing that the resources spent on falconry could be better used elsewhere, like, say, improving infrastructure or funding military campaigns. These dissenting voices remind us that while falconry had its allure, it was also a flashpoint for debates about imperial spending. Now, let's tackle the elephant, or should I say, falcon in the room. Was all this artistic representation just a bunch of propaganda? Well, yes and no. Sure, there was an element of PR genius at play, with falconry being used to project the image of a powerful and cultured empire. But that doesn't mean it was all smoke and mirrors. The reality was that these depictions, while idealized, were rooted in the genuine prestige and skill associated with falconry. It was a bit like a modern-day political campaign, part reality, part spectacle, all designed to dazzle. But the cultural significance of falconry didn't stop at art and literature. It also played a diplomatic role, akin to gifting a vintage bottle of Bordeaux or a limited edition Rolex. Falcons were the ultimate diplomatic gift, a gesture of goodwill and respect. Imagine receiving a peregrine falcon as a token of alliance. It's basically the Ottoman equivalent of a handshake deal sealed with feathers. This practice wasn't just about showing off. It was a strategic move, a feathered olive branch that could smooth over tensions or seal new alliances. And here's a nugget of trivia to impress at your next dinner party. Falcons were so prized that they became a currency of sorts, traded across empires like an avian version of Bitcoin. 1599, England's Queen Elizabeth, I received a pair of gyrfalcons from Sultan maimed Roman III, a diplomatic gesture that spoke volumes without a single word. It was these exchanges that helped to cement political ties and facilitate trade agreements, proving that sometimes diplomacy is for the birds, literally. As twilight descends on the Ottoman realm, you start to see how falconry was far more than just an aristocratic hobby. It was a microcosm of the empire's cultural and political identity, a multifaceted phenomenon that transcended mere sport. Through the eyes of poets, travelers, and diplomats, falconry becomes a lens through which we can understand the complex interplay of power, prestige, and perception. So, as you reflect on this intricate dance of art, literature, and diplomacy, remember that in the Ottoman Empire, falconry was both a mirror and a magnifying glass, a reflection of imperial grandeur and a tool for expanding influence. It was a world where the skies were not just a stage for falcons, but a canvas upon which the empire painted its story. And as the day gives way to night, the saga of falconry continues, a testament to the enduring allure of power, wrapped in feathers and flying high. As the stars begin to twinkle over the vast Ottoman sky, the curtain falls on an era where falconry was the glittering jewel in the empire's crown. But like any good story, this one has its twists, and the plot thickens with the inevitable decline of this once dominant pastime. So, what led the noble art of falconry to flutter down from its lofty perch? Spoiler alert. It wasn't just one thing, but a medley of historical shifts that clipped its wings. First, let's talk economics because, let's be honest, money makes the world, or in this case, the falcon, go round. By the 17th century, the Ottoman Empire was feeling the pinch. The financial strains of endless wars, including the costly campaigns against the Habsburgs and Safavids, drained the imperial coffers. Maintaining a cadre of falcons, along with their entourage of bazdars and handlers, was like trying to keep a fleet of luxury yachts afloat during a recession. It was a lavish expense even the sultans could no longer justify. When you're counting coins to fund your next military push, the idea of splurging on a bird that might decide today is a rest day seems less appealing. Economic woes were only part of the equation. Enter the game changer, firearms. By the late 1600, guns were rewriting the rules of hunting and warfare. Why spend hours training a falcon to hunt when a musket could do the job with a single shot? The sizzle of gunpowder was the soundtrack to a new era, one where precision engineering trumped age-old traditions. The falcon's breathtaking stoops and aerial acrobatics were no match for the practical efficiency of a well-aimed bullet. As much as it pains the romantic in us, progress waits for no bird. And then there's fashion, because let's face it, tastes change faster than you can say, ruffled feathers. The Ottoman elite began to crave new thrills and entertainments. The empire was expanding its gaze towards Europe, where art, music, and architecture were evolving with the Renaissance's echoes. Aristocrats who once boasted about their falconry prowess now sought the prestige of collecting fine art or commissioning grand palaces. Owning a falcon was still impressive, sure, but it no longer held the same cachet as, say, having the latest imported Venetian glassware. Social dynamics also played their part. As the empire modernized, the urban elite grew in influence, and with them, a shift in cultural values. The rustic charm of falconry didn't resonate as much with city dwellers who were more concerned with urban sophistication than rural pursuits. The bustling bazaars and thriving coffee houses of Istanbul became the heartbeds of culture, where the chatter was more likely about poetry and politics than the latest falconry triumphs. Yet, despite this decline, the legacy of falconry endures, a ghostly echo of a time when a bird could indeed make or break a man's reputation. It's a curious reminder of human nature's penchant for spectacle and status. Even as the Ottoman Empire moved on to new obsessions, the image of a sultan with a falcon on his arm endures in our collective imagination. It's a testament to falconry's odd but enduring charm, an anachronism that continues to captivate us long after the last falconer retired his glove. Falconry's decline also offers a poignant lesson in the impermanence of power and prestige. What was once the pinnacle of status became a footnote in history, overtaken by the relentless march of progress. It's a case study in how cultural values shift, often leaving behind those who can't or won't adapt. The falcon, once the king of the skies, found itself edged out by the very innovation that defines human civilization, a bittersweet irony that history has a knack for serving up. Reflecting on this legacy, we find ourselves at the intersection of myth and reality. The romantic allure of falconry is undeniable, a world of sultans and soaring birds, of whispered court intrigues and majestic hunts. But peel back the layers, and you uncover a narrative shaped by economics, technology, and changing tastes. It's a reminder that history is not just a tale of grand gestures and epic feats, but also of the subtle shifts and unseen forces that shape our world. So, as you drift off, cradled by the knowledge of this bygone era, remember that history is the ultimate storyteller. It weaves tales of power and decline, of splendor and fall, each thread a testament to the complexity of human ambition. And while the echoes of falconry may no longer dominate the skies, they remain embedded in the annals of time, a flight of fancy that continues to captivate our imagination. In the end, perhaps it's not the falcon's decline we should mourn, but rather celebrate the enduring legacy it leaves behind, a symbol of a world where the skies were both a stage and a battlefield, and where every flight was a dance with destiny. Your eyelids feel like they're glued shut, and it's not because you stayed up binge-watching the latest series. Nope, it's that relentless Mongolian sunrise, blazing through the felt yurt you've called home for the night. Welcome to the 15th century Mongolian caravan life, where nature doesn't bother with snooze buttons. Before you can even think about rolling over for a bit more sleep, there's a cacophony outside. Men shouting, animals braying. It's the sound of a caravan gearing up for another grueling day. And when I say caravan, I don't mean a quaint little line of covered wagons. I'm talking about a moving metropolis of over 10,000 camels, plus horses, donkeys, and the occasional yak, all loaded with goods that would make a medieval merchant drool. Silk, porcelain, spices. This is the Silk Road, baby, the economic superhighway of the Middle Ages. Now, let's talk logistics. Forget your modern sense of personal space. Here, you're wedged in between a camel's pungent breath and a trader who hasn't bathed since, well, ever. But hey, who has time for hygiene when you're moving precious cargo across 4,000 miles of treacherous terrain? And speaking of hygiene, let's just say that morning fresh feeling wasn't exactly a priority. Water's a luxury out here, so you're rinsing your face with a splash of whatever's left over from last night's drink. The caravan isn't just about transporting goods, it's an entire ecosystem. Every day is a relentless march, covering around 15 to 25 miles if the weather's on your side. Rain or shine, snow or sandstorm, it's all about the grind. And grind you must, because that silk isn't going to trade itself. You see, these caravans are the lifeblood of an empire that stretches from Eastern Europe to the Sea of Japan. No pressure, right? Let's bust a myth while we're at it. Life in a caravan wasn't some romantic, nomadic dream. Sure, the idea of the open road and endless horizons sounds appealing, but reality checks in the form of bandits and hostile terrain tend to dampen the wanderlust. The Mongols were famously tough as nails, but even they had to respect the sheer force of nature and human treachery. The economics behind these journeys are just as complex as the routes themselves. A single camel costs about 20 silver liang, roughly 2 grams of silver per liang to purchase, a hefty investment given that you need hundreds just to make a decent profit. The goods they carry, silk, jade, spices, are worth their weight in gold. Quite literally, as a pound of silk could fetch enough gold to make a king's ransom. And the stakes, they're sky-high. Lose your wares to a sandstorm or a caravan raid, and you're not just out of a job, you're out of a future. The Mongolian Empire didn't become one of the largest contiguous empires in history by being soft on failure. It's all about survival of the fittest, or in this case, the savviest trader with the best caravan security. That jostling you feel as you finally drag yourself out of the yurt is the start of the daily ritual. You're not just moving goods, you're part of a massive, coordinated dance where everyone has a role. From the lowliest camel herder to the most esteemed merchant, it's all hands on deck. Some of these folks are professional traders, others are just trying to make it to the next town. But make no mistake, everyone is here for the silver lining, the promise of wealth at the end of the road. As you sip a concoction that's more yak milk than tea, it's worth pondering why these journeys matter. This isn't just about trading trinkets, it's about linking empires, sharing ideas, and spreading technology. The Mongolian caravans are the arteries of the world, pumping culture from one corner of the globe to another. Without them, Europe might still be in the dark about gunpowder, and Asia might have missed out on the joys of woolen textiles. But before you get too starry-eyed, remember, this is a grind. The romance of the Silk Road is a thin veil over the harsh reality of survival. You're a cog in a massive machine, and today's goal is simple. Keep moving, keep trading, and try not to get stepped on by a camel. As the sun climbs higher, you're off, a speck in a vast procession that stretches further than the eye can see. The day's just begun, and there's a whole lot of history waiting to be made, one dusty step at a time. As the sun makes its relentless climb across the sky, the caravan inches forward like a massive, lumbering beast. It's a wonder they don't all wander off into the horizon like a herd of lost sheep, but here's where the Mongolian mastery of navigation kicks in. Forget GPS. You've got the night sky, and it's more reliable than any app with a penchant for losing signal. Mongolians were practically stargazers before it was cool. They didn't just look up for a bit of celestial poetry. They were reading a road map written in constellations. It's a skill honed over generations, because when you're trudging through the vast, featureless steppe, you either learn to navigate by the stars, or you end up as a skeleton in a cautionary tale. The North Star, Polaris, was the ultimate guide. Fixed in the sky like a cosmic compass, it was the trusty beacon that kept them on track. You can't get much more old school than that. By day, the Mongols weren't exactly left high and dry. They had an impressive knack for deciphering the landscape, using distant mountains, rivers, and even the color of the earth as markers. The Great Khan's empire might have spanned an area twice the size of the Roman Empire at its peak, but it wasn't just sheer landmass that held it together. It was the ability to traverse it with precision. The Mongols were the original road trip warriors, minus the snacks and sing-alongs. Speaking of the Great Khan, the political backdrop of this grand caravan is a story of ambition and economic necessity. The Silk Road was the lifeline of the Mongolian Empire, a sprawling trade network that connected east to west like an ancient internet of goods and ideas. But we're not talking about some haphazard exchange of trinkets. This was a calculated strategy to bolster an empire's economy that was as vast as it was varied. Genghis Khan and his descendants didn't conquer half the known world just to sit on their laurels. They understood the value of trade, and they played the Silk Road like a master chess player, always several moves ahead. The Mongols were no strangers to political savvy. Under Genghis Khan, they implemented a system of relay stations, like medieval pit stops, that facilitated quick communication across the empire. Called the Yam, this network allowed messages to travel at lightning speed for the time, ensuring that orders and news could be delivered in days instead of weeks. It was the fiber-optic network of its day, powered by horse and rider. Now, let's gallop into the myth of Mongolian horsemanship. You've probably heard tales of Mongols practically born in the saddle, capable of riding for days without rest. But unless you're a horse whisperer with thighs of steel, the reality isn't quite as romantic. Yes, Mongols were exceptional riders, with a life spent in the stirrups from an early age. But even the hardiest horse needs a break. A typical Mongolian horse could cover about 60 to 70 miles a day, but not without stopping for water and rest. And you, dear time traveler, would likely be whining about saddle sores long before the day's end. These horses weren't just transportation, they were an extension of the Mongolian warrior's body. Small but mighty, they were the SUVs of the steppe, capable of enduring harsh climates and rough terrain. It was their endurance, not their speed, that made them invaluable. A horse could be the difference between life and death, success and failure. It's no wonder they were treated with a reverence that bordered on spiritual. As the caravan plods onward, you can't help but marvel at the sheer scale of this operation. It's a logistical feat that makes modern supply chains look like child's play. And while you might be daydreaming about the exotic allure of the Silk Road, remember that for the Mongols, this wasn't a leisurely jaunt. It was a necessity born out of economic and political strategy. The riches of the empire depended on these caravans, and every step was a dance between opportunity and danger. So, the next time you're stuck in traffic and your GPS has a meltdown, spare a thought for the Mongolians who navigated by stars and landscapes, with nothing but the vastness of the steppe and the promise of prosperity to guide them. As the day trudges on, and the caravan continues its grueling journey, you're left with a newfound respect for the resilience of these traders and the empire they fueled. The road is long, the challenges many, but the rewards, both tangible and intangible, are what keep you moving forward. As the sun continues its oppressive march across the sky, you're painfully reminded that medieval Mongolian caravans didn't come with a complimentary parasol. Nope, you're out here with nothing but the burning steppe and the determination of a trader hoping his goods don't end up as a mirage on the horizon. It's a midday test of endurance, and let's just say you're failing the sweat test. Keeping pace with the seasoned traders is no small feat. These folks didn't just wake up one morning and decide to join a caravan for kicks. They've been doing this their entire lives, hardened by years of navigating treacherous terrain and dodging nature's curveballs. It's a delicate ballet of survival, where every step is a calculated move in a dance that's as old as time. You, on the other hand, are more like a background extra in this epic production, hoping not to trip over your own feet, or worse, get trampled by a camel. Speaking of camels, let's talk logistics. These beasts are the MVPs of the steppe, the unsung heroes of the Silk Road. Laden with silk, porcelain, and spices, they are the medieval versions of a cargo plane, minus the in-flight peanuts. A single camel can carry up to 600 pounds of goods, That's like strapping a grand piano to its back and expecting it to saunter across the desert. And these camels, they do it without even breaking a sweat, though you certainly are. Now, you might think the caravan is just a ragtag assembly of traders and their beasts, but there's a rigid hierarchy at play here. At the top, you've got the chief merchant, the big cheese, the one calling the shots. He's the Gordon Ramsay of trading, barking orders, and ensuring everything runs smoother than a well-oiled yak cart. Below him are the journeymen traders and their apprentices, each with their own role to play in this intricate economic web. And what about women and children? They're not just tagging along for the ride. Women often played crucial roles, managing supplies, trading goods, and sometimes acting as negotiators. Far from the passive figures history sometimes paints them as they were integral to the caravan's success. Children, meanwhile, were learning the ropes, quite literally, as they helped with the animals and absorbed the art of trade through osmosis. It's a family affair where everyone pulls their weight, quite literally, in the case of those camels. The harsh conditions of the steppe don't discriminate. Sandstorms, extreme temperatures, and the threat of bandit attacks are just another day on the job. It's a constant battle between man and nature, and if there's one thing you learn quickly, it's that nature doesn't play fair. This isn't some romantic adventure where you ride off into the sunset. It's a gritty reality where survival hinges on your ability to adapt and endure. The Mongols have perfected this over centuries, but you're just hoping to make it to the next water stop without collapsing. But let's not forget the trading goods themselves. Silk, the crown jewel of the caravan, is as delicate as it is valuable. Transporting it across thousands of miles is no small task, especially when your packing solutions are more medieval than modern. Forget bubble wrap. You've got straw leather and a prayer that it doesn't rain. A single bale of silk could fetch a fortune, but only if it arrives intact. It's a gamble with high stakes and even higher rewards. Spices, too, are a hot commodity, quite literally. Cinnamon, nutmeg, and pepper are worth their weight in gold, transforming bland European dishes into culinary masterpieces. The journey to deliver these goods is fraught with peril, but the promise of profit keeps the traders moving forward. It's the original spice trade, long before pumpkin spice lattes were a thing. As you trudge along, it becomes clear that this caravan is not just a means of economic exchange. It's a microcosm of society. Each member plays a crucial role in the success of the journey, from the lowliest camel herder to the most esteemed merchant. It's a lesson in cooperation and survival, where every step is a testament to human resilience. And while the romantic notion of the Silk Road might lure you in, it's the harsh realities that keep you grounded. By midday, the caravan is a well-oiled machine, a testament to the Mongols' mastery of logistics. It's a sprawling enterprise that would impress even the most seasoned modern-day supply chain managers. But while the goods they carry are invaluable, it's the knowledge and cultural exchange that truly enriches the journey. This is a living, breathing network of ideas, spreading innovation and technology across continents. The Silk Road is more than just a trade route. It's the backbone of a connected world long before the internet made it easy. So, as you plod along, remember that you're part of something much larger than yourself. The caravan is a testament to human ingenuity and determination, a symbol of an empire that thrived on trade and connection. It's a journey that's as much about the destination as it is about the road itself. And while you might not last a day in this grueling environment, you can't help but admire the resilience and tenacity of those who did. The sun may be unforgiving, but the rewards, both tangible and intangible, are what keep you moving forward, one dusty step at a time. So your journey with the caravan has been quite the eye-opener, a cocktail of grit, sweat, and more camel-induced chaos than you signed up for. But just when you think you've got the hang of this medieval hustle, reality does its favorite trick, throws a curveball. Enter stage left, the ever-present threat of bandits. Yep, the medieval Silk Road equivalent of pop-up ads, but with more tangible consequences. Now, these bandits aren't your garden-variety pickpockets. No, they're the scourge of the steppe, wielding as much menace as a Game of Thrones villain, minus the dragons, but with all the audacity. As the caravan snakes its way through vast, lawless stretches of land, banditry becomes less of a possibility and more of a certainty. It's a grim reminder that the Silk Road wasn't just a trade route. It was the Wild West before cowboys made it cool. So, how did these caravans manage to keep their precious cargo from becoming some bandits' early retirement plan? Well, they didn't just rely on hope and good intentions. Enter the elite caravan guards, the unsung heroes armed to the teeth and ready to put up a fight. These weren't just any guards. They were seasoned warriors, often hired from local tribes who knew the terrain better than most. They were the medieval equivalent of a security force, complete with swords, bows, and the kind of steely resolve that makes you think twice about a career in banditry. But let's not romanticize caravan guards as knights in shining armor. They were more like mercenaries with a vested interest in keeping the caravan, and by extension themselves, safe. They travel alongside the traders, eyes peeled for any signs of trouble. And trouble, dear friend, was never too far away. A caravan could be raided at any moment, and the spoils were often too tempting for bandits to resist. The guards' presence was a deterrent, but not a guarantee. Think of them as the antivirus software of the Silk Road, essential, yet never 100% foolproof. Numbers tell the tale. A caravan of 10,000 camels could employ anywhere from 500 to 1,000 guards, depending on the threat level of the route. That's a lot of manpower just to keep a bandit's sticky fingers off your silk. And with wages for guards costing anywhere between 1 to 2 silver liang per month, it was a hefty expense. But when weighed against losing goods worth their weight in gold, it was a cost worth bearing. Talk about putting your money where your mouth is. Now, let's get into the economic nitty-gritty. Banditry wasn't just a nuisance. It was a genuine economic threat. A single successful raid could wipe out months of effort and investment. And in an empire that thrived on commerce, that was a hit no one could afford. The Mongolian economy was a delicate balance of supply and demand, and bandits skewed that balance faster than you can say markdown. But here's where it gets interesting. Mongolians weren't just brawny, they were brainy. The art of avoiding bandits wasn't just about brute force, it was also about diplomacy and strategic alliances. Mongolian caravans often negotiated safe passage through bandit-infested territories by striking deals with local chieftains. In exchange for a cut of the profits, or sometimes just a promise of non-aggression, these chieftains would keep their less scrupulous neighbors in check. It was diplomacy at its finest, a testament to the Mongols' knack for turning potential foes into allies. Who needs a sword when you've got a silver tongue? And if negotiation didn't work, there was always the age-old tactic of misdirection. Caravans would often send out scouts to map out the safest routes, avoiding known bandit hotspots like the plague. They'd travel under the cover of night, using the stars as their guide, a tactic that sounds as romantic as it was life-saving. It was all about keeping one step ahead, a game of cat and mouse where the stakes couldn't be higher. But let's not kid ourselves. Sometimes caravans did get hit, and when they did, it wasn't just a loss of goods. It was a blow to the morale and reputation of the traders involved. A raided caravan was like a bad Yelp review. Word spread, and trust plummeted faster than a lead balloon. In a world where reputation was everything, traders couldn't afford to be seen as easy targets. This is where the Mongolian diplomatic machinery kicked into high gear. The empire had a vested interest in keeping the Silk Road safe and functional. After all, the wealth of the empire depended on it. So, they implemented a system of protection agreements that extended across the Silk Road. These agreements were like a medieval insurance policy, ensuring that traders could ply their trade with a reduced risk of becoming a bandit's next victim. The Mongols were pragmatic rulers. They understood that a thriving trade network required more than just military might. It needed stability and trust. And so, they fostered an environment where traders felt secure enough to take risks. It was a calculated move that paid off, turning the Silk Road into a bustling artery of commerce that stretched from Europe to Asia. As the sun begins its descent and the caravan trudges onward, you can't help but marvel at the delicate balance of power and politics that keeps this massive operation running. The threat of bandits is ever present, but so is the resilience and ingenuity of the traders who navigate these treacherous waters. It's a dance of survival, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to adapt and endure. So, next time you're grumbling about modern-day travel woes, spare a thought for these medieval traders. They didn't have the luxury of TSA or travel insurance, just grit, guts, and a healthy dose of Mongolian diplomacy. As the caravan presses on, you're left with a newfound appreciation for the complex web of alliances and strategies that kept the Silk Road alive. The journey is far from over, and the road ahead promises more challenges and discoveries. But for now, you're content to be part of this living tapestry, a thread in the grand design of history, moving ever forward into the unknown. As the caravan winds down for the evening, you can almost hear the collective sigh of relief echoing across the steppe. It's as if the universe itself is hitting pause after a long day of trudging through the Mongolian wilderness, a place as unforgiving as it is vast. The sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in colors that belong on a postcard, not that you'd have time to admire them. There's a camp to set up, and the Mongolian nomads don't believe in magic tents that pitch themselves. The process is a lesson in teamwork that would put any corporate trust exercise to shame. First, you've got the yurts, those iconic round tents that look like someone tried to make a house out of a giant hat. They're portable, sure, but assembling them is less like snapping together a pop-up tent and more like building IKEA furniture, minus the Swedish meatballs as a reward. Each yurt requires a frame of wooden poles and a covering of felt, which is great insulation against the biting night air. Put together, they create a makeshift village in the middle of nowhere, a testament to human ingenuity and the need for shelter in an otherwise inhospitable environment. Once the yurts are up, it's time for dinner. Now, if you're expecting a medieval buffet with a decent charcuterie spread, you're in for a rude awakening. Food scarcity is the rule, not the exception. The nomadic diet is primarily dairy-based, enriched with whatever meat is available, usually mutton or goat. If you're lucky, there might be some dried cheese curds, which sound more like a snack for a hiking enthusiast than a meal for a weary traveler. And let's not forget the ever-present erag, a fermented mare's milk beverage that's as much a staple as it is an acquired taste. Think of it as kombucha's more potent ancestor. You sip it cautiously, trying not to grimace, while the seasoned nomads down it like a health tonic. Despite the culinary shortcomings, there's a sense of camaraderie that fills the air. It's born out of necessity, this bond between traders and nomads, forged by the shared struggle of surviving in a land that offers little in the way of comfort. You can almost hear the ghosts of past travelers whispering tales of survival and commerce, their stories woven into the fabric of the Silk Road itself. It's a stark reminder that while the romance of the road is compelling, it's the grit and determination that actually keep the wheels turning. As dusk settles, the myths surrounding these caravans start to unravel. We often romanticize the nomadic lifestyle, imagining a carefree existence under the stars. But the truth is, these travelers faced a brutal reality. Food scarcity wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a constant threat. Starvation could strike quickly, especially if a caravan was delayed or supplies ran out. And while the communal nature of the camp might seem idyllic, it was a survival strategy, pure and simple. Strength in numbers wasn't just a cliché, it was a lifeline. Yet, there's an undeniable legacy in these caravans that transcends their hardships. These nomadic traders didn't just transport goods, they transported culture, ideas, and technology across continents. Silk Road was less a road and more a spider's web of interconnected trade routes, each strand vibrating with the exchange of knowledge. From papermaking techniques to advances in medicine, the caravans were the original purveyors of globalization, long before modern technology shrunk the world into a digital village. Speaking of technology, let's not forget the humble compass, an invention that revolutionized navigation. While the Mongols preferred to rely on the stars, the spread of this ingenious device along the Silk Road laid the groundwork for future explorers. It was like handing someone a magical amulet that pointed the way home, an essential tool in a world where lost wasn't an option. The economic impact of these caravans is also worth pondering. They didn't just trade silk and spices, they created entire economies. Cities along the Silk Road flourished as traders stopped to rest and resupply, transforming sleepy outposts into bustling hubs of commerce. Samarkand, Bukhara, and Kashgar became synonymous with wealth and splendor, their marketplaces echoing with the sounds of haggling merchants and the clinking of coins. This wasn't just trade. It was an economic revolution that shifted the balance of power and prosperity. And yet, despite their monumental achievements, The nomads and traders of the Silk Road lived in a world that was as perilous as it was wondrous. Bandits, harsh climates, and the ever-present spectre of famine were constant companions. It's a testament to their resilience that they persevered, driven by the promise of profit and the allure of discovery. In many ways, their journey mirrors our own modern-day quests for success and adventure, albeit with fewer camels and more Wi-Fi. As you sit around the campfire, listening to the nomads exchange stories in a language you barely understand, you're struck by the realization that you're part of a continuum. These caravans were the arteries of an empire, the lifeblood of a world that thrived on connection. And while the Silk Road may have faded into history, its legacy endures, a reminder of humanity's unquenchable desire to explore, trade, and connect. So, would you last a day in a 15th-century Mongolian caravan? Let's be honest, probably not. Between the grueling pace, the Spartan diet, and the ever-present threat of disaster, it's a life that demands more grit than most of us can muster. But that's precisely why these caravans capture our imagination. They represent a time when the world was vast and mysterious, when the promise of the unknown was enough to propel men and women across deserts and mountains in search of fortune and fame. In the end, the Silk Road is a symbol of what we can achieve when we embrace the unknown, when we dare to venture beyond the horizon. It's a legacy of resilience, innovation, and human connection that continues to inspire us to this day. So, as you drift off to sleep, lulled by the crackling of the campfire and the distant hum of the steppe, remember that you're part of a story that's still being written, a journey that began long before you were born and will continue long after you're gone. And that, my friend, is the true magic of history, an endless road, filled with endless possibilities, waiting for you to take the first step. If you were to wake up in ancient Arabia, don't expect a Starbucks on every corner. Instead, you'd find yourself amidst a bustling network of trade routes that made camel caravans the ancient equivalent of freight trains. These weren't just any routes. We're talking about the ancient superhighways of commerce that funneled silk and spices from the mysterious East to the hungry markets of the West. And why should you care? Well, this vast network didn't just move goods. It shaped civilizations, influenced economies, and yes, even started a few wars over the centuries. First things first, the geography. Arabia is basically one giant sandbox with some mountains thrown in for good measure. But don't let the desolate charm fool you. This land of sand and sun was in a prime location. It nestled right between Africa and the Indian subcontinent, making it a natural crossroads for trade. For traders, this meant navigating a terrain that was as unforgiving as a Game of Thrones winter, only with more sunburn and fewer dragons. Now, let's talk logistics, because moving goods through deserts was the original extreme sport. Forget about your luxury sedans and sleek cargo ships. Back then, the ultimate mode of transport was the humble camel caravan. These ships of the desert were the Ayyubids of the ancient world, minus the surge pricing. Camels could carry up to 600 pounds and go without water for days, making them the perfect companions for a long haul across arid landscapes. They were the unsung heroes, the Teslas of their time, minus the autopilot. But why would anyone endure such a dusty trek? 2 words, spices and silk. These weren't just commodities, they were the bling of the ancient world. Silk wasn't just fabric, it was a status symbol. If you were draped in silk, you were basically the ancient equivalent of an Instagram influencer. Spices were no less valuable. Imagine a world without pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg. These were the original flavor enhancers, and they were worth their weight in gold. In fact, in some cases, they were literally exchanged for gold. That's right, pepper was once so valuable that 2,000 pounds of it could buy you a small city. Talk about putting your money where your mouth is. The early trade networks that emerged around 1000 BCE were nothing short of ambitious. We're talking routes stretching from the shores of the Arabian Peninsula all the way to the bustling bazaars of the Mediterranean. These early traders were like the ancient world's LinkedIn, connecting various cultures and economies. They didn't just peddle goods. They exchanged ideas, technology, and sometimes even unwelcome diseases. It was globalization before globalization was cool. But let's not get too romantic. This wasn't some idyllic Silk Road travelogue. The reality was harsh. Caravans faced blistering heat, treacherous sandstorms, and the ever-present threat of bandits looking to make a quick buck, or whatever currency was jiggling in those saddlebags. Trade was as much about survival as it was about profit. Merchants had to be savvy negotiators and even savvier survivalists. Think Bear Grylls, but with more bartering and less bug-eating. Economically, these trade routes were the lifeblood of ancient Arabia. They turned once sleepy towns into thriving trade hubs. Cities like Petra and Palmyra became bustling centers of commerce, culture, and undoubtedly a fair amount of intrigue. These cities were like the Silicon Valleys of their day, except instead of tech startups, they had spice markets and silk emporiums. The wealth generated from these trades helped fund armies, build palaces, and occasionally pay off the odd marauding warlord. But what about the myths? The romantic tales of camel caravans shimmering under a moonlit desert sky, carrying treasures untold and secrets unsaid. While there's some truth to the allure, the reality was often grittier. Primary sources, like the accounts of Greek historian Herodotus, paint a picture that's less about starlit adventures and more about the grueling day-to-day grind. According to Herodotus, these routes were beset with dangers, and wealth won only by toil. If that doesn't sound like the tagline for a new Indiana Jones movie, I don't know what does. In the grand tapestry of history, the trade routes of ancient Arabia were the threads that connected continents. They were conduits of culture, pipelines of prosperity, and often the pathways of power struggles. While the spices and silk might have been the headliners, the true story lies in the journey itself, a journey that, despite its hardships, forever changed the course of human history. So next time you sprinkle that cinnamon on your latte or wrap yourself in a silk scarf, spare a thought for those ancient traders. They walked so we could sip in style. Now, let's dive into the dizzying world of ancient economics, where spices were the Bitcoin and silk was the Ethereum of its day. First, let's talk numbers, because who doesn't love the cold, hard truth that prices bring? In the markets of ancient Rome, a pound of black pepper could cost you up to 3 denarii. Now, if that sounds like pocket change, consider this. A soldier's daily wage was about 1 denarius. That's right. Your average Roman centurion had to forego 3 days of sweaty, shield-bashing labor just to sprinkle a little flavor on his otherwise bland gruel. Pepper wasn't just a condiment, it was culinary bling. Cinnamon, meanwhile, was the Versace of spices, commanding 10 times the price of pepper. And why not? It was exotic, it was aromatic, and in a world without Glade plugins, it was practically a household necessity. This wasn't just a sprinkle on your morning oats. Having cinnamon in your pantry was a status symbol, a sweet-smelling signal that you had arrived. But what about silk? Silk was a different beast altogether. Imagine a world where showing up in a silk tunic was akin to rolling up in a Ferrari. Silk wasn't just about luxury, it was about exclusivity. We're talking about a fabric so prized, the Romans once tried to ban men from wearing it to prevent them from looking too effeminate. Yet, like Prohibition-era booze, the allure of silk was unstoppable. At one point, it was valued as highly as gold, with a single pound of silk fetching enough to buy you a decent-sized farm. Silk was the ultimate flex, a shimmering badge of wealth and power that whispered, "I'm important, and I know it." Now, how did these commodities move from the lush lands of the East to the bustling markets of the West? Enter the trade hubs like Petra and Palmyra, the bustling metropolises that were the Wall Streets of their time. Petra, with its rock-cut architecture and strategic location, wasn't just a pretty face. It was an economic powerhouse, a place where traders from across the world haggled over prices and sealed deals with the shake of a hand, or maybe a camel's bridle. Petra was more than just a stopover. It was a destination, a place where fortunes were made and dreams were dashed. Palmyra, on the other hand, was the ultimate crossroads. Located in modern-day Syria, it was the Las Vegas of ancient trade, minus the neon lights and Elvis impersonators. Palmyra's wealth came from its strategic positioning along the Silk Road, bridging the gap between the Roman Empire and the far-off lands of Persia and India. It was a melting pot of cultures, languages, and currencies, with merchants from all corners of the world converging to exchange goods and gossip. But let's not forget the ancient version of supply chain issues. You think your Amazon package is late? Try waiting months for a shipment of silk that might never arrive. Traders faced more than just the occasional delay. They dealt with bandits, political instability, and of course, the relentless whims of Mother Nature. A sandstorm could set a caravan back by weeks, while a change in political alliances could reroute entire trade networks overnight. It was a high-stakes game of risk and reward, where every successful delivery was a triumph and every delay a potential disaster. The economics of ancient trade were mind-boggling, not just because of the prices, but because of the sheer complexity of it all. Currency exchange was a wild ride, with traders often bartering goods directly or using coins from far-flung empires. Imagine trying to buy your morning coffee with a mix of euros, yen, and seashells, and you'll begin to get the picture. Yet, all this chaos and complexity was what made the system work. It was a web of connections that spanned continents and cultures, a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless quest for profit. These trade routes weren't just highways for goods. They were conduits for ideas, innovations, and even diseases. They were the original internet, a sprawling network of human endeavor that knit the world together in ways we are only beginning to understand. So, next time you're stuck in traffic, cursing the latest supply chain glitch, spare a thought for those ancient traders. They laid the groundwork for the globalized world we live in today, one spice-laden camel at a time. And as you sip your cinnamon latte or admire a silk scarf, remember the true cost of those luxuries: the sweat, the toil, and the sheer audacity of those who dared to dream big and trade even bigger. Now, speaking of daring dreams and even bolder strategies, let's dive into the political chess game that was ancient Arabia. If you thought modern geopolitics was a tangled mess, try untangling the web of alliances, rivalries, and marital machinations that kept the trade routes of Arabia running smoother than a camel's hump. This was a world where the stakes were as high as a desert sunset and just as unpredictable. First off, let's talk about the power brokers, the city-states and tribal alliances that were the real players in this desert drama. Think of them as the original corporate giants, only instead of tech support and HR departments, they had armed caravans and strategic marriages. At the heart of it all were city-states like Petra, Palmyra, and Mecca. Forget the glitz and glamour of modern financial centers. These were the real hubs of wealth and influence. Take Petra, for example. This wasn't just an architectural marvel carved into rose-red cliffs. It was the nerve center of Nabatean power. The Nabateans, a savvy bunch of traders, controlled the lucrative incense routes that stretched from southern Arabia to the Mediterranean. With frankincense and myrrh practically flowing through their fingers, they were the Jeff Bezos of their day, minus the space rockets. How did they keep competitors at bay? Simple: strategic fortifications, alliances, and a healthy dose of economic savvy. Petra wasn't just about rocks and stones. It was about power and profit. Then there was Palmyra. If Petra was the cool kid on the block, Palmyra was the mysterious stranger with a hidden agenda. Located smack dab in the middle of the Syrian desert, Palmyra was a melting pot of cultures and a hotbed of intrigue. It was the kind of place where traders and travelers rubbed shoulders with spies and scoundrels. The Palmyrans weren't just about trade. They were experts in diplomacy and warfare, playing off the Romans and the Parthians like a game of chess. And just like in chess, every move was about positioning and power. But let's not forget the tribal alliances that knit the fabric of Arabian politics. These weren't just casual partnerships. They were intricate networks of loyalty and obligation bound by blood, marriage, and the occasional skirmish. Picture this: you're a Bedouin chieftain, and you've got a caravan loaded with spices heading to Damascus. Do you risk the bandit-infested passes alone? Nope. You call in favors with allied tribes who control the territory, ensuring safe passage in exchange for a cut of the profits, or maybe a daughter's hand in marriage. These alliances were as fluid as the desert sands, shifting with the winds of fortune and necessity. Now, about those strategic marriages. These weren't your average love stories. They were more like business mergers with a splash of romance. Marrying off a daughter to a rival tribe wasn't just about gaining a son-in-law. It was about securing trade routes and cementing alliances. Think of it as the ancient version of a corporate takeover, only with more camels and fewer lawyers. These marriages were often the glue that held alliances together, ensuring that goods flowed freely and the coffers stayed full. But of course, where there are alliances, there are also betrayals. Ancient Arabian politics was rife with backstabbing and double-crossing. One minute you're sharing a cup of spiced wine with a trusted ally. The next, you're fending off an ambush in the middle of the desert. It was a world where loyalty could be as fleeting as a desert rainstorm, and where betrayal was often just a better offer away. And what about the protection of these trade routes? Well, it wasn't all sunshine and sand dunes. These routes were like the arteries of ancient Arabia, vital and vulnerable. City-states and tribes invested heavily in security, deploying armed escorts and building way stations to protect their caravans. But even the best-laid plans could be undone by a well-timed raid. Bandits were the ever-present menace, the highwaymen of the desert, always lurking just out of sight. To counter this, savvy traders hired mercenaries, the ancient equivalent of hiring a security firm, except these guys were more likely to wield a scimitar than a smartphone. And let's not forget the role of diplomacy. A well-placed bribe or a strategically timed gift could often do more to ensure safe passage than 100 armed guards. It was a delicate dance of power, where a single misstep could spell disaster. So, in this grand desert theater, who were the real winners? It wasn't always the biggest or the strongest, but often the most cunning, those who could navigate the shifting sands of politics as deftly as they navigated the trade routes. The ones who understood that in the game of trade, as in life, it's not just about having the goods, but knowing how to move them. As we leave this chapter of Arabian intrigue, remember that the world of trade was more than just an exchange of goods. It was a complex web of power, politics, and profit. And as with any great story, there's always more to uncover. So stay tuned as we continue this journey through the sands of time, where the next twist in the tale is just a caravan's journey away. And speaking of caravans, let's take a detour from the wheeling and dealing and dive into something a bit more cerebral. Those trade routes weren't just about moving silk and spices. They were cultural superhighways, and the traffic was flowing both ways. Ideas, languages, and religions hitchhiked along the dusty paths of ancient Arabia, changing the face of the region in ways that would make even the most ambitious influencer campaigns seem like child's play. Take language, for instance. You can't haggle over the price of cinnamon if you can't even say cinnamon in a language your trading partner understands, right? Arabic was the lingua franca of the desert, but traders also spoke Greek, Aramaic, and a smattering of Persian. This linguistic cocktail didn't just facilitate commerce, it was the foundation of a vibrant cultural exchange. Imagine the world's most eclectic book club, where epic poems and philosophical treatises were swapped alongside sacks of frankincense. But let's not stop at language. Religion was also making waves along these trade routes. The Arabian Peninsula was a spiritual melting pot long before it became synonymous with Islam. Paganism, Judaism, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism all jockeyed for spiritual supremacy, each leaving its mark on the region. The Kaaba in Mecca, for example, was a pilgrimage site long before the Prophet Muhammad made it famous. It housed a pantheon of deities, a kind of spiritual airbomb for the guards. And speaking of spiritual airbomb, let's talk about the Queen of Sheba. Legend has it she was rolling in with caravans laden with gold, incense, and precious stones, all to woo King Saladin. But was she really the ancient world's biggest bling enthusiast, or was her legend a bit of historical clickbait? The truth is, while Sheba was indeed a prosperous kingdom, thanks to its position on the incense route, the tales of her wealth are likely more myth than reality. Archaeological evidence suggests she was more of a savvy trader than a royal sugar mama. So next time you hear about her legendary wealth, take it with a grain of salt, or perhaps a pinch of saffron. But back to religion. With merchants came monks and missionaries, each eager to spread their spiritual gospel along with their goods. By the time the 6th century rolled around, the Arabian Peninsula was a patchwork of religious beliefs, each vying for followers like a divine popularity contest. You had Nestorian Christians in the north, Jewish tribes in the oases, and Zoroastrian influences wafting in from Persia. It was a spiritual buffet, where the faithful could sample a little bit of everything. The rise of Islam in the 7th century added a new dimension to this religious tapestry. Unlike before, there was now a unifying force that spread rapidly along the trade routes. Within a few decades, Islam had not only reshaped the spiritual landscape of Arabia, but also transformed it into the epicenter of a new, dynamic civilization. The same routes that once carried incense and silk now spread the teachings of Muhammad, turning what was once a cultural crossroads into the heart of a burgeoning empire. And let's not forget the more tangible cultural impacts, like architecture. Petra's rock-cut facades and Palmyra's grand colonnades were not just feats of engineering. They were open-air museums showcasing the fusion of Greco-Roman styles with Arabian motifs. These cities were the architectural equivalent of a greatest hits album, blending the best of different cultures into a harmonious whole. They were a testament to the power of cultural exchange, where traders were not just swapping spices, but also blueprints and building techniques. But just like today, not all cultural exchanges were welcomed with open arms. The influx of foreign ideas often sparked tension and resistance. Conservative factions viewed these new beliefs as a threat to traditional values, a sentiment as old as time. It was a delicate balance, maintaining the flow of goods and ideas while navigating the undercurrents of cultural change. As we weave through this intricate tapestry of trade and culture, it's clear that ancient Arabia was far more than a barren desert. It was a vibrant crossroads where the world came to barter, banter, and occasionally bicker. The trade routes were the arteries of this dynamic world, pumping life into the towns and cities that dotted the landscape. They were the threads that knit together a rich tapestry of human experience, one that continues to intrigue and inspire. But hold on to your keffiyehs, because the story isn't over yet. We've still got more ground to cover and more myths to bust as we continue our journey through the sands of time. So, stay tuned for the next leg of our adventure, where we'll delve deeper into the economic and political consequences of this sprawling trade network. Who knew a few camels and a couple of spice sacks could change the course of history? So, as we dust off the sand from our sandals and step into the next chapter of our historical escapade, let's talk about the not-so-glamorous ending of these legendary trade routes. Picture the scene. It's the tail end of the medieval era, and the world is about to get a serious upgrade. We're talking less camel caravans and more clipper ships. You see, while the sand-swept pathways of ancient Arabia were once the superhighways of commerce, by the late Middle Ages, a new player entered the game, maritime trade. And like a plot twist in a blockbuster movie, the seas were about to steal the spotlight. The decline of these ancient land routes wasn't like the dramatic crash of a Roman Empire. Nope, it was more like watching your favorite show get slowly replaced by a new series that's just a bit more exciting. This transition started in earnest around the 15th century, when European explorers like Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus were busy sailing the high seas in search of new routes to the east. Vasco rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1498, opening a direct sea route to India that made the overland trails through Arabia seem like yesterday's news. Why risk the wrath of sandstorms and bandits when you could simply sail around Africa? The sea routes were faster, cheaper, and could handle larger cargoes. We're talking about the difference between snail mail and high-speed internet. European powers like Portugal and Spain became the new gatekeepers of spice and silk, and the Arabian Peninsula's strategic relevance, at least in terms of trade, took a nosedive. The bustling hubs like Petra and Palmyra faded into obscurity, leaving behind echoes of their former glory. But the sea wasn't the only factor. Political shifts within the region also played a role. As the Byzantine and Sasanian empires duked it out, and later, with the rise of the Ottoman Empire, the political landscape of the Middle East became as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. This instability made overland trade routes less attractive compared to the relative stability of maritime routes controlled by European powers. So, what about those camel caravans we love to romanticize? Why do we still find ourselves enchanted by images of camels marching under a starlit desert sky? Well, that's human nature for you. We adore a good story, and the idea of an intrepid merchant with his trusty camel, braving the elements to bring exotic goods to faraway lands, is the stuff of legends. It's easy to forget the back-breaking labor, the endless dunes, and the ever-present threat of attacks. Instead, we choose to remember the allure of adventure, the promise of riches, and the romance of a simpler, albeit harsher, time. And let's not kid ourselves. The camel caravan is like the vintage car of the trade world. Sure, modern ships and planes can carry more, faster, and cheaper, but they lack that certain je ne sais quoi, a timeless charm that harkens back to the days when trade was as much about daring as it was about dollars. In the grand scheme of things, these ancient trade routes laid the groundwork for the globalized world we inhabit today. They were the original threads in the vast tapestry of human connectivity, the first links in a chain that would eventually span the globe. While the routes themselves may have dwindled, their legacy endures. They were the incubators of cultural exchange, the arteries through which the lifeblood of civilization flowed. As we wrap up this journey through the sands of time, it's worth reflecting on the ironies of history. Those ancient traders, with their camel caravans and spice sacks, could hardly have imagined the world we live in today, a world where you can order cinnamon from your couch and have it delivered to your door without so much as a grain of sand in your shoe. Yet, it's their legacy that paved the way for our interconnected planet, where ideas, goods, and cultures intertwine more than ever. So next time you find yourself dreaming of camel caravans or sipping a cinnamon latte, remember the real story behind the romance. The sweat, the grit, the unwavering spirit of those who dared to venture across unforgiving deserts. They were the unsung pioneers, the risk-takers who helped shape the world as we know it. And in a way, we're all just passengers on this ancient caravan, forever moving forward on the road they first carved through the sands of time. The chill in the air has a bite to it, not unlike Henry Roman VIII mood if the royal kitchen runs out of the good wine. Welcome to Tudor England, where the gilded facade of a king's court masks a land teetering on the edge of transformation, and sometimes chaos. It's a place where the nobility's robes are as flamboyant as their courtly intrigues, and the common folk, well, they're just trying to survive the winter without freezing their card pieces off. Start with the big guy himself, King Henry Roman VIII, a man who was larger than life in every conceivable way, including his waistline. By the time he was done with the English throne, he'd racked up 6 marriages, a few annulments, and a religion overhaul for good measure. But today, we're not here to dissect his matrimonial misadventures. Instead, let's dive into the merry mayhem of his Christmas court. The Tudor court was a spectacle of excess, especially during the Yuletide season. Picture this, an endless stream of feasts, each more opulent than the last. These grand events cost a pretty penny. Henry wasn't a man to pinch them either. Hosting Christmas celebrations at Hampton Court could cost upwards of £7,000, a mind-boggling figure when you consider that a skilled craftsman earned about £5 a year. The king's penchant for pageantry wasn't just about flaunting wealth. It was a strategic display of power and stability meant to bedazzle foreign dignitaries and intimidate potential foes. And of course, to keep his court entertained and loyal. But let's not get too swept up in the glamour. The stark reality of life outside the palace walls tells a different story. For the vast majority of Henry's subjects, life was anything but a non-stop party. England in the 16th century was a land divided by class, where the gap between the haves and the have-nots was as wide as the king's appetite. While the aristocracy was sipping spiced wine and devouring swans during the 12 days of Christmas, the common folk were struggling to keep the hearths burning. Their holiday fare was more likely to include a humble mince pie, if they were lucky. And speaking of pies, let's dispel a culinary myth. Contrary to romanticized tales, the Tudors weren't munching on turkey legs like some sort of pre-Renaissance caveman club. Turkeys didn't strut onto the English dining scene until the 1520s, courtesy of Spanish explorers returning from the Americas. Before then, Henry's table was laden with game meats like venison and boar, prepared with enough spices to make the most jaded palate dance a jig. Now, let's not forget the political landscape at play here. Henry Roman VIII rule was marked by internal strife and external threats. The king's break with Rome in 1534, a move that established the Church of England, was as much a political maneuver as it was a personal vendetta. The dissolution of the monasteries that followed was a financial windfall for the crown, but it also displaced thousands and left a scar on the English religious landscape. Against this backdrop, the Christmas revels served as a much-needed distraction, a temporary escape from the religious and political upheaval that defined the era. The court itself was a microcosm of the Tudor world, a place where alliances were forged over banquets and plots were hatched in shadowy corridors. And oh, the gossip. Imagine a real-life soap opera where the stakes were life and death, and the players were armed with more than just sharp tongues. In this environment, Christmas was about more than just merriment. It was an opportunity for social climbing and political maneuvering. Who you were seen with was as important as where you were seated at the feast. But let's not be too cynical. The Christmas season also offered genuine moments of joy and camaraderie. wassailing, carol singing, and the Lord of Misrule, a sort of medieval master of ceremonies who turned the social order on its head, were all part of the festivities. It was a time when, for a brief moment, the rigid structures of Tudor society seemed to soften, and the spirit of the season transcended rank and file. Yet, beneath the holly and ivy, the economic realities of the time were harsh. The Tudor economy was in flux, buffeted by inflation and changes in trade. The king's lavish spending, particularly on wars with France and Scotland, drained the royal coffers faster than you could say, "Good King Wenceslas." To fund his ambitions, Henry resorted to debasing the currency, reducing the silver content in coins, a move that led to the inevitable inflation and hardship for those at the bottom of the social ladder. And so, as the court prepared for the king's grand Christmas, the common people faced the season with a mix of hope and trepidation. For them, the holiday was not just a time of celebration, but a chance to reflect on the year past and the uncertain future ahead. They might not have had the luxury of Hampton Court's roaring fires and sumptuous feasts, but they had their own traditions and their own ways of making merry amidst the struggles of daily life. So there you have it, a world of contrasts, where the opulence of the Tudor court shone brightly against the backdrop of a kingdom grappling with change. As we stand on the threshold of Henry VIII Christmas, ready to step inside the palace walls, remember, history is a tapestry of stories both grand and gritty, woven together by the hands of those who lived it. Now, let's see what other surprises the Tudor Christmas might hold. Stepping inside the grand halls of Hampton Court Palace during a Tudor Christmas is like entering a whole new world, one where opulence and chaos cohabit like roommates who barely tolerate each other. At first glance, the palace seems to defy the winter chill with its soaring ceilings and expansive rooms. But the truth, it's just as cold indoors as out, unless you're lucky enough to find yourself near one of the few roaring hearths. Heating this behemoth was no small feat, and the servants who kept the fires lit could tell you it wasn't all romantic flickering flames and cozy warmth. The architectural design of Hampton Court was nothing short of revolutionary for its time, completed in the early 1500 by the ambitious Cardinal Wolsey before Henry VIII took it over. Because what Henry wanted, Henry got. It was the most modern palace in England. Picture 1,000 rooms sprawled across acres of land, each more elaborately decorated than the last. But here's the kicker. Heating such a massive structure was a logistical nightmare. The palace relied on over 50 fireplaces, each requiring a constant supply of wood. Imagine hauling massive logs through endless corridors. Talk about a Tudor workout plan, and let's talk about those fireplaces. Unlike today's efficient central heating, these were massive stone structures that belched smoke and required constant tending. Keeping these fires going wasn't just about comfort, it was about survival. The servants tasked with this were the unsung heroes of the palace, working in shifts to ensure that the king's guests didn't catch frostbite between courses. It's estimated that Hampton Court burned through the equivalent of 600 trees a year just to keep the fires stoked. So, next time you're grumbling about your heating bill, think of the poor souls who spent Christmas lugging wood through freezing hallways. Lighting was another beast altogether. Forget electricity. This was a world lit by flickering candlelight, casting long shadows and adding a certain ambience that was both magical and slightly sinister. Beeswax candles were the gold standard, reserved for the king and his closest allies, while the rest of the palace made do with cheaper tallow candles. The latter came with a delightful aroma of rendered animal fat, perfect for pairing with your venison pie. And yet, despite the practicality of candles, the cost was exorbitant. Lighting Hampton Court during the winter months could cost hundreds of pounds, a small fortune at the time. But let's not romanticize the glow too much. The reality was that maintaining proper lighting in a palace of this size was a Sisyphean task. The staff was in a constant race against the darkness, replacing burned-out candles and ensuring no corner was left in shadow, lest they invite any spooky goings-on or, worse, an opportunistic thief. It's a wonder they didn't all collapse from exhaustion, or perhaps they did, only to be swiftly replaced by a fresh servant plucked from the masses waiting outside the palace gates, eager to serve the king in whatever capacity they could. And now, we must address the elephant in the room, or rather, the draft in the hallway. Those grandiose tapestries adorning the walls, they weren't just there to impress. They were the Tudor equivalent of insulation. These huge woven artworks were designed to trap heat and keep the cold at bay. But here's the ironic twist. While they were effective in theory, in practice, they were often more decorative than functional. With windows made of thin and fragile glass, the draught was an uninvited guest at every feast. Those lavish tapestries were more like band-aids on a gaping wound of winter chills. Let's not forget the logistical ballet that was feeding Henry's court during the holiday season. Running a kitchen that could serve hundreds was an operation akin to a military campaign. The great kitchen at Hampton Court was a sprawling network of rooms, each dedicated to a different culinary task. Cooks, spit boys, and scullions worked tirelessly to prepare extravagant meals, often with little regard for the culinary preferences of the next in line for the throne. Unlike the romantic notion of a grand feast prepared with love and care, this was more like organized chaos, with each dish a testament to the sheer willpower and resilience of the kitchen staff. And here's a myth worth debunking: the idea that the Tudor court dined in refined elegance. While the king might have enjoyed his meals on gilded platters, the same can't be said for everyone else. Most of the court ate off wooden trenchers, essentially fancy cutting boards, and shared cups and cutlery. Picture a scene not unlike a modern-day picnic, only with more velvet and less plastic. It was a communal affair, and while this might sound quaint, it was often a breeding ground for gossip and intrigue. Because what better way to pass the time between courses than by whispering about your neighbor's latest indiscretion? Now, here's a juicy tidbit. Despite the grandeur, the palace wasn't the most hygienic of places. With so many people crammed into one space, sanitation was a nightmare. The Great Hall might have been resplendent. The less glamorous corners of Hampton Court were rife with the smells and sounds of a small village. Imagine chamber parts being emptied out of windows, and you'll understand why the gardens were best admired from a safe distance. The staff tasked with maintaining cleanliness were the unsung heroes of the court, often working tirelessly to ensure that the palace didn't descend into squalor. So, while the image of Henry Roman VIII court at Christmas conjures visions of opulence and splendor, the reality was far more complex. The palace was a marvel of its time, yes, but it was also a place of hard work, logistical challenges, and more than a few drafty hallways. The staff, often overlooked in the grand narrative, were the true architects of the holiday festivities, ensuring that every candle was lit, every fire was stoked, and every guest was fed. The myth of Tudor opulence is a seductive one, but it's important to remember the human element that made it all possible. Beneath the facade of luxury lay a network of individuals whose labor kept the wheels turning, even as the king feasted and frolicked. Hampton Court was a stage, and every person within its walls played a part in the grand production that was Tudor life. As we leave the palace for now, remember that history is as much about the untold stories as it is about the grand narratives. Stay tuned, because the Tudor tale is far from over. Now that we've peeled back the velvet curtain on the logistical nightmare that was a Tudor Christmas, let's plunge into the heart of the matter, the customs and entertainment that turned these chilly halls into a hotbed of festivity. Spoiler alert: Henry Roman VIII wasn't just the host with the most. He was the original party kingpin, orchestrating a symphony of revelry that made even the most jaded courtiers tap their bejeweled shoes. Let's start with the main event, the feast. Picture tables groaning under the weight of roasted meats, exotic fruits, and enough sugar sculptures to make your dentist weep. But don't let the grandeur fool you. This was less Michelin-starred precision and more medieval buffet madness. The logistics were Herculean. Feeding a court of hundreds wasn't a casual affair. It was a culinary crusade. The great kitchen of Hampton Court churned out meals like a 16th-century Iron Chef showdown, with cooks working round the clock to ensure no dignitary was left carving a bland, boiled turnip in frustration. And what did they eat, you ask? Forget turkey legs. Those were latecomers to the party. The real stars were peacocks and swans, roasted whole and served with their feathers reattached for maximum shock and awe. Talk about presentation. Then there was the boar's head, garnished with bay leaves and apples, a nod to ancient pagan traditions that the Tudors embraced with gusto. And let's not overlook the pies. These weren't your average apple pies. We're talking about pastry coffins filled with everything from venison to minced meat, spiced to the nines. All this decadence was underpinned by a simple rule: if it could be cooked, it could, and would be eaten. Now, about those costs. Hosting such gastronomic extravagance didn't come cheap. We're talking thousands of pounds spent on imported spices alone, at a time when a pound of pepper could cost the equivalent of a small fortune. To put it in perspective, the annual wage of a skilled labourer barely covered a fraction of the royal spice bill. But for Henry, it wasn't just about indulgence. These feasts were a demonstration of status and power, a way to keep his courtiers close and his enemies closer, preferably with their mouths full and their minds too dulled by wine to plot any treachery. Speaking of wine, let's talk about the booze. The Tudors knew how to keep the party going, and the drink flowed like the Thames in full flood. Mulled wine, spiced ale, and hippocras, a sort of spiced wine cocktail, were the order of the day, each more potent than the last. Forget wine glasses. These were served in goblets fit for a king, literally. And let's not forget wassail, a punchy concoction of ale, apples, and spices that was as much a part of the festivities as the feasting itself. Wassailing wasn't just about drinking. It was a communal ritual, a toast to health and prosperity with a side of carol singing that could range from the angelic to the ear-splitting, depending on the singer's sobriety. Once the feasting was done, the entertainment began, and here's where Henry truly shone. Forget Netflix. This was live-action drama at its finest. The highlight, the mask. Imagine a theatrical spectacle that combined elements of dance, music, and elaborate costumes. Think Shakespeare meets Cirque du Soleil with a dash of political intrigue. These performances were often allegorical, with subtle and not so subtle nods to the king's achievements and aspirations. Henry himself was known to don a costume and take part, strutting his stuff center stage. It was all about showcasing the monarchy's splendor while reminding everyone who was in charge. But beneath the layers of silk and satin, there was a darker side to these entertainments. The mask was as much a tool of propaganda as it was a form of art. Each performance was carefully crafted to bolster the king's image, reinforcing his divine right to rule and subtly undermining his foes. It was a masterclass in political theater, where the line between reality and performance blurred like a poorly drawn stage backdrop. And then there were the games. Tudor Christmas wasn't all highbrow theatrics and culinary excess. It was also a time for good old-fashioned fun. Jousting tournaments, archery contests, and even a form of early bowling called logats were all part of the festivities. Henry, ever the sportsman, loved nothing more than a good joust, though by the end of his reign, his waistline had expanded to the point where mounting a horse became more comedic than competitive. Still, the spirit of the games was less about winning and more about camaraderie, and of course, a chance to impress the king. But let's not romanticize the merriment too much. Beneath the laughter and the revelry lay a world of political maneuvering and social climbing. For courtiers, Christmas was an opportunity to curry favor with the king and secure their place in the pecking order. Who got invited to sit at the king's table, or who was chosen to dance in the mask, was often a matter of life and death in the cutthroat world of Tudor politics. It was a time when alliances were forged and rivalries were laid bare, often with consequences that would echo long after the last goblet was drained. So, as Henry Roman VIII held court amidst the twinkling candlelight and the echoing laughter, he wasn't just celebrating Christmas. He was orchestrating a delicate dance of power and politics, using the festive season as a stage to solidify his reign and remind his subjects of his majesty. It was a time of contrasts, where the joy of the season clashed with the harsh realities of a kingdom in turmoil. And as the king raised his goblet in a toast, you can bet his mind was already plotting the next move in the grand chess game that was his rule. As we leave this scene of Tudor opulence and intrigue behind, remember that the story of Henry's Christmas is far from over. The court's revelry was but a prelude to the dramas that would unfold in the new year. So stay tuned, because the tale of Henry Roman VIII winter revels is about to take some unexpected turns. So, as the echoes of Henry Roman VIII grand revelries fade into the candlelit corridors of Hampton Court, let's shift our gaze to the unsung heroes of these winter revels, the servants and staff. Picture them as the invisible cogs in the royal machine, tirelessly working behind the scenes to keep the illusion of Tudor opulence running smoothly. Their stories might not be immortalized in tapestries, but they are just as integral to understanding the drama of a Tudor Christmas. Now, before you get swept away by visions of Downton Abbey-style elegance. Let me reel you back to the gritty reality of 16th-century servitude. Life for a Tudor servant was less about polite curtsies and more about dodging the wrath of a hungry monarch. Let's be clear. The social hierarchy was as rigid as Henry's waistline was expansive. At the top, you had the nobility, their every whim a command. Below them lay a sprawling underclass of cooks, cleaners, and couriers, each tasked with a specific, often back-breaking job. Consider this. While the king and his courtiers guzzled gallons of hippocras, the cooks slaved away in kitchens that could rival Dante's Inferno. The great kitchen at Hampton Court was a behemoth, sprawling over several rooms and employing over 200 staff members. Now that's a workforce, and their work was grueling. Imagine turning a spit for hours on end in front of a roaring fire, sweat soaking your brow as you tried to avoid becoming part of the main course. The spit boys, often young lads, were at the bottom rung of the kitchen hierarchy, and their work was as thankless as it was crucial. But it wasn't just the kitchen staff who bore the brunt of Tudor excess. The laundresses, tasked with cleaning the finery of the court, faced equally daunting challenges. With no washing machines in sight, laundry was a manual labor of epic proportions. Picture scrubbing regal garments by hand, in icy water, often with harsh lye soap that could peel skin like a Tudor apple. It was a Sisyphean task, and with the court's penchant for spilling food and drink, a never-ending one. So, who were these hidden figures, and why did they put up with such grueling work? Well, the reality was that employment at the palace offered stability, of a sort. While the wages were paltry, typically around £2 per year for the lowest workers, it was still more than many could hope for in rural England. And remember, with room and board included, it was a step up from subsistence farming or beggary. However, let's not romanticize this too much. These were jobs born of necessity, not aspiration. For many, serving the king was less about loyalty to the crown and more about survival in a world that offered few opportunities for advancement. Let's not gloss over the economic disparities that defined the Tudor court. While the nobility indulged in lavish feasts, the servants often subsisted on leftovers, if they were lucky. The contrast was stark, and the social hierarchy as immutable as the stone walls of Hampton Court. The head cook might earn £10 a year, a princely sum compared to the spit boys' meagre earnings, but still a pittance when juxtaposed with the king's extravagant expenditure. Then there was the matter of mobility, or lack thereof. For most servants, their position in the social hierarchy was fixed from birth. The idea of a kitchen maid rising to a position of influence was about as likely as Henry giving up his 6 wives for a life of monastic celibacy. The rigid class structure was both a product and a perpetuator of the economic system, one that kept the lower classes firmly in their place while allowing the upper echelons to maintain their grip on power. But amidst the drudgery, there were moments of levity and defiance. Servants had their own forms of resistance, from pilfering extra food to gossiping about their betters, a Tudor form of whistleblowing that could lead to some very real consequences. And while their lives were defined by toil, the communal nature of their work could foster a sense of camaraderie. Picture them huddled in the warmth of the kitchen, sharing stories and dreams, their laughter a brief respite from the ceaseless demands of royal service. The harsh realities of life as a Tudor servant are underscored by the records of the time. Take the case of John Skelton, the unfortunate jester who, after falling out of favour, found himself reduced to a life of poverty. His tale serves as a cautionary reminder of the fragile nature of courtly favour and the precarious existence of those who lived by the whims of the king. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the myth of the merry, loyal servant. The romanticized vision of happy retainers is a convenient narrative, but the truth is far more complex. While some servants might have felt a genuine loyalty to the crown, for many, service was a necessity rather than a choice. The Tudor court was a microcosm of the broader societal structures, where power was concentrated in the hands of a few, and the rest were left to navigate the murky waters of servitude. As we pull back the luxurious velvet curtain on the Tudor court, the hidden figures of history come into stark relief. Their stories, though often untold, are a vital part of the tapestry of Tudor life. They remind us that history is not just the domain of kings and queens, but of the countless individuals whose labor and resilience kept the wheels of power turning. So, as the candlelight fades and the echoes of revelry grow dim, Remember the invisible army that toiled in the shadows, their lives a testament to the grit and determination that defined the era. Stay tuned, because the Tudor tale is far from over, and there are more layers yet to uncover. With the unsung heroes of the Tudor court now firmly in our mind, let's pivot to the man whose larger-than-life reign continues to cast a shadow over English history, Henry Roman VIII himself. Ah yes, the monarch who redefined the concept of a royal midlife crisis. His legacy, much like his waistline, is sprawling. It's a tapestry of cultural shifts, political upheavals, and yes, some serious festive flair that still echoes in our celebrations today. Let's start with the big one, the formation of the Church of England. Henry's decision to break from Rome wasn't just an act of matrimonial desperation, though getting out of a marriage he didn't want was definitely on the agenda. It was a seismic shift in religious and political authority. By declaring himself the supreme head of the Church of England in 1534, Henry not only secured his divorce from Catherine of Aragon, but also tightened his grip on power. This move fractured the religious landscape of England, leading to the dissolution of monasteries and a significant redistribution of wealth and land. It was a financial windfall for the crown, akin to hitting the jackpot on a Tudor slot machine, and laid the foundation for the Protestant Reformation in England. Now, you might be wondering, how does this ecclesiastical upheaval connect to Christmas traditions? Well, Henry's reign popularized the notion of the monarch as a divine figure, one who celebrated Christmas with a blend of religious solemnity and earthly indulgence. These royal Christmases were not just about gluttony and grandeur. They were a display of divine right and authority. The king, as a quasi-spiritual leader, threw the best Christmastide parties in town, blending religious observance with a healthy dose of secular merriment. This dual nature of celebration, sacred and secular, permeated English society and influenced how the holiday was observed. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'll find echoes of this in our own Christmas traditions, where religious services are followed by festive feasts and family gatherings. But what about the myths that persist about Tudor festivities? Let's tackle the big one, the idea that Henry's court was perpetually drowning in a sea of turkey legs and merry jigs. The truth, much like the man himself, Tudor celebrations were more complicated. Take the myth of the bountiful feast. While the nobility certainly dined lavishly, the reality for most of Henry's subjects was more gruel than grandeur. The extravagance of the court was a facade, a carefully crafted illusion of prosperity that masked the harsh economic realities of the time, like a Tudor Instagram filter. And then there's the notion of the constantly merry monarch. Sure, Henry knew how to throw a party, but his reign was also marked by paranoia, political intrigue, and a fair share of executions. The same man who danced the night away in Hampton Court's grand halls also sent friends and foes alike to the scaffold with alarming regularity. It's a stark reminder that beneath the veneer of royal festivities lay a brutal political landscape, where allegiances could shift as quickly as the king's affections. This duality of Henry's reign, a mix of revelry and ruthlessness, fascinates us to this day. So why do these myths persist? Because they're compelling. They offer a glimpse into a world that seems both familiar and fantastical, where the lines between myth and reality blur like a Tudor tapestry in the flickering candlelight. Henry Roman VIII, with his larger-than-life persona, embodies the romanticized vision of a bygone era, where kings were both tyrants and troubadours, and the court was a stage for both drama and delight. The lasting impact of Henry's reign on English cultural traditions is undeniable. He turned Christmas into a time of political theatre and personal indulgence, a tradition that has trickled down through the ages. Today, we still gather around tables laden with food, share stories and laughter, and maybe even indulge in a little too much wassail, though our modern version might be more mulled wine than medieval ale. As we wrap up our journey through Henry Roman VIII winter revels, it's clear that our fascination with Tudor England endures for a reason. It's a period of history that's as complex as it is captivating, where opulence and austerity coexist in a delicate dance. The legacy of Henry's reign is a testament to the enduring power of storytelling, a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a tapestry woven from the lives of those who lived it. So the next time you gather with family and friends for a holiday feast, raise a glass to the Tudors. For all their flaws and follies, they've left us with a rich and nuanced legacy that continues to shape our understanding of history and celebration. As you bite into your Christmas pudding, remember, history, like good food and fine wine, is best savored with a touch of humor and a dash of perspective. And with that, we close the chapter on Henry Roman VIII Christmas Court, leaving behind the flickering candlelight of Hampton Court and stepping back into the present. But fear not, for the stories of the Tudors are far from over. There are more tales to tell, more myths to debunk, and more history to explore. Stay tuned, because the past is always waiting to be rediscovered, one story at a time. In the bustling chaos of 12th century Tikrit, a young boy named Yusuf ibn Ayyub was born on a stormy night in 1137. If you think the name sounds like a spell from a fantasy novel, hold your horses. This kid would grow up to be none other than Saladin, or Salah ad-Din, if you're feeling fancy. But before he became the legendary warrior and sultan, he was simply a Kurdish youngster trying to make sense of a world that seemed tailor-made for betrayal and bloodshed. Tikrit, located in modern-day Iraq, wasn't exactly the tranquil village you'd want for a childhood retreat. It was more like the medieval version of a reality show, minus the cameras, but with all the backstabbing. The political scene during Saladin's early years was a tapestry of Byzantine intrigue, regional warlords playing power games, and a constant shuffle of alliances. The Seljuk Turks were the big fellas in the region, but their once mighty empire was splintering like a poorly constructed IKEA shelf. Saladin's family had its own share of drama. His dad, Najm ad-Din Ayyub, was a governor under the Zengid ruler Imad ad-Din Zengi, and let's just say that Zengi wasn't handing out Employee of the Month awards. Zengi was more of a conquer first, ask questions never kind of guy, infamous for capturing Edessa in 1144, a move that triggered the Second Crusade. Not exactly the kind of boss you'd ask for a casual coffee chat. Saladin's early years were marked by this kind of political turbulence. His family was forced to flee Tikrit when he was just a toddler, thanks to a familial spat that could rival any soap opera. They made their way to Marseille, another hotspot of medieval mayhem, and later to Damascus. If you're keeping track, that's a 100-mile trek from Tikrit to Marseille and another 270 miles to Damascus. Not exactly a Sunday drive, but let's not kid ourselves. These weren't exactly the best places for a peaceful upbringing. Damascus in the 12th century was a cosmopolitan city, but it was also a chessboard where political pieces moved unpredictably. The Ayyub family's status, as Kurdish outsiders, added a layer of complexity to their lives. They were navigating a world dominated by Arab and Turkish elites, where loyalty was as fickle as a medieval Wi-Fi signal. Saladin's education was a mix of traditional Islamic teachings and the harsh lessons of realpolitik. While he likely studied the Quran and delved into the wisdom of scholars like Al-Ghazali, he also absorbed the brutal realities of power from his father and uncle. Shirkuh, a military commander with a talent for turning battles into personal feuds. Now, here's where we start debunking some myths. Saladin didn't emerge as a full-fledged hero overnight. Hollywood might have us believe he was born with a sword in one hand and a peace treaty in the other, but in reality, his rise was a grind. His early career involved more administrative work and less swashbuckling than you'd expect. His uncle Shirkuh, however, was the one with a penchant for military campaigns, particularly in Egypt, a region that would eventually play a pivotal role in Saladin's story. The political landscape of the time was a veritable maze. The Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt was crumbling under internal strife and external pressures, while the Crusader states were eyeing every opportunity to expand their territories. Meanwhile, the Nur al-Din, a successor to Zengi, was consolidating power in Syria and making eyes at Egypt like a kid eyeing the last slice of pizza. Saladin's early career was deeply entwined with these shifting sands. He followed Shirkuh on 3 campaigns into Egypt, not as a commanding officer, but as part of the entourage learning the ropes. It's like being the intern who tags along to the board meetings and hopes to pick up some tips, but ends up grabbing coffee instead. Here's the kicker. Saladin wasn't even the first choice for leadership in his family. His rise to power was as much about opportunity as it was about skill. After his uncle Shirkuh died in 1169, Saladin was appointed as the vizier of Egypt, not because of his dazzling charisma or military genius, but because he seemed like a safe bet. A young, relatively unknown figure who could be easily manipulated. Spoiler alert, they were wrong. While Saladin's early days in Egypt were fraught with challenges, he proved to be a master of balancing political alliances, religious duties, and military strategies. He began to consolidate power, ousting his rivals and strengthening his position. The Ayyubid dynasty was in its infancy, but Saladin was already laying the groundwork for what would become an empire. So, as we wrap up this chapter of Saladin's story, let's get one thing straight. His path to greatness was neither linear nor guaranteed. He was a product of his time, molded by the chaotic forces that surrounded him. From Tikrit to Damascus to Cairo, Saladin's journey was one of adaptation and survival, of learning when to wield a sword and when to offer an olive branch. And as we'll see in the next part of our saga, his story was just getting started. Saladin's story, my friends, is like a medieval epic that never got a proper Hollywood adaptation. After securing his position in Egypt, Saladin wasn't just sitting around like a sultan on vacation. Nope, he was plotting, scheming, and doing what any ambitious leader would do, expanding his empire. And if you think he did it all with chivalry and charm, think again. Saladin was a real-life chess master, making moves that would put any grandmaster to shame. First up, let's talk about Egypt. By 1171, Saladin had managed to do something that would have given any historian whiplash. He abolished the Fatimid Caliphate. That's like walking into a corporate boardroom and firing the entire board of directors. With the Fatimids out of the picture, Egypt was his, not just as a vizier, but as the de facto ruler. But how did he pull it off? Well, it wasn't just swords and spears. It was more like a mix of strategic marriages, alliances, and a hearty dose of religious legitimacy. He declared allegiance to the Sunni Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, which was a bit like getting the seal of approval from the top dog. This move not only legitimized his rule among Sunni Muslims, but also helped him consolidate his power without having to spill more blood than necessary. But wait, the political intrigue doesn't stop there. Saladin knew that to keep Egypt stable, he needed to keep his military happy. Enter economics class 101, medieval style. Running an army wasn't cheap. It was like managing a traveling rock band, complete with groupies and all. We're talking about salaries for soldiers, food supplies, and of course, camels. Lots of camels. To give you some numbers, a medieval army on the move could require up to 1,000 camels just to carry the supplies. As for coins, well, Saladin wasn't exactly Scrooge McDuck, swimming in gold. He had to be smart about it, which meant taxing the wealthy and controlling trade routes like a Wall Street broker eyeing the stock market. With Egypt secure and the economy somewhat stable, Saladin's next move was to go north. Remember that boardroom coup analogy? Well, now imagine the boardroom expanding to include the entire Middle East. Saladin set his sights on Syria, but he wasn't just going to waltz in like a rock star. He needed to play the long game. Syria was a hotbed of factionalism, and its cities were as divided as a room full of sports fans arguing over who's the GOAT. Saladin had to be the ultimate diplomat, negotiating alliances that were shakier than a Jenga tower. One wrong move, and the whole thing could come crashing down. And then there was the elephant in the room, or rather, the Crusaders. The Latin kingdom of Jerusalem was like the nosy neighbor always peeking over the fence, ready to pounce at any sign of weakness. Saladin knew he couldn't afford to ignore them, so he played the diplomatic card, signing treaties when necessary, but always with his eye on the prize, the city of Jerusalem itself. Fast forward to 1187, and we're at the famous Battle of Hattin. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of the Super Bowl, but with way more at stake. The Crusaders, led by Guy of Lusignan, had made the classic mistake of underestimating Saladin. They marched out into the arid plains of Hattin, far from any water source, like a pack of dehydrated tourists forgetting their canteens. Saladin, on the other hand, knew how to use the terrain to his advantage. He lured them into a trap, cutting off their access to water and wearing them down with heat and hunger. It was a tactical masterpiece, and by the end of it, the Crusaders were as toasted as a marshmallow over a campfire. Saladin captured the True Cross, a relic of immense symbolic importance, and took Guy of Lusignan prisoner. This was no small feat. It was like capturing the crown jewels, the Mona Lisa, and the Stanley Cup all in one go. The victory at Hattin was a turning point. It opened the door to Jerusalem, the holy grail of medieval real estate. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's pause and appreciate the genius behind Saladin's strategy. He wasn't just a warrior. He was a visionary who understood the power of both the sword and the olive branch. His ability to balance force with diplomacy, to rally his troops while keeping the home front secure, was nothing short of remarkable. As the dust settled after Hattin, Saladin's reputation soared. Yet, he didn't let success go to his head. Instead of taking a victory lap, he focused on the practical realities of maintaining an empire. War, after all, wasn't just about winning battles. It was about winning hearts and minds. Saladin knew he needed to be seen as a just ruler, not just a conqueror. He began implementing policies that would stabilize his newly acquired territories, ensuring that his rule was as much about governance as it was about glory. And so, we leave Saladin on the cusp of his greatest triumph, with Jerusalem in his sights. But remember, this isn't the end of the story. It's just the end of the beginning. The road ahead will be fraught with challenges, both from within and outside his empire. As we dive deeper into the saga of Saladin, we'll see how he navigated the complexities of power, balancing ambition with humility and warfare with statesmanship. So, buckle up, because the ride is far from over. As Saladin stood on the brink of capturing Jerusalem, one might picture a gallant knight in shining armor, a sort of medieval superhero poised to swoop in and save the day. But hold your horses, or camels in this case, because the reality was a lot more nuanced. Saladin's reputation as the epitome of chivalry is more a product of the medieval spin machine than an unvarnished truth. Sure, he had his fair share of knightly qualities, but he was also a cunning strategist who knew the power of image long before Instagram influencers made it a career. Let's dive into the myth versus reality of Saladin's chivalry. Pop culture often paints him as a perfect gentleman, the kind who'd tip his helmet and offer a rose after a duel. But the real Saladin was more like a medieval PR genius. He understood the importance of narrative, how a well-crafted story could elevate you from a mere mortal to a living legend. His image as a just and noble leader wasn't purely organic. It was cultivated, like a carefully tended garden, with a bit of smoke and mirrors thrown in for good measure. One of the most enduring tales is his supposed bromance with Richard the Lionheart. According to some chroniclers, the two were like the frenemies of the medieval world, exchanging gifts and mutual admiration. But let's not get carried away here. These stories are more Instagram-friendly than historically accurate. While there was mutual respect, Richard reportedly said Saladin was without doubt the greatest and most powerful leader in the Islamic world. The idea of them sharing a pint and swapping war stories is, shall we say, a tad embellished. In reality, their relationship was a complex dance of diplomacy and rivalry. They were more like two chess grandmasters, each recognizing the other's skill but never letting their guard down. Saladin did, however, send Richard a horse when his rivals was killed in battle, which may sound chivalrous, but it was also a savvy move to keep the peace talks alive. After all, peace could be as profitable as war, sometimes even more so. Saladin's PR machine was a well-oiled contraption. Chroniclers like Baha ad-Din ibn Shaddad, who served as his biographer, were instrumental in shaping his image. Baha ad-Din's accounts often portray Saladin as the ideal Muslim ruler, pious, just, and merciful. But let's not forget that chroniclers had their biases. Baha ad-Din had every reason to highlight Saladin's virtues. After all, the man was his meal ticket. And then there's the infamous siege of Jerusalem in 1187. Saladin's capture of the city is often depicted as a model of restraint and mercy, especially when compared to the Crusaders' brutal sack of the city in 1099. But while Saladin did allow many Christians to leave unharmed for a ransom, another clever financial move, his decision wasn't purely altruistic. It was a calculated strategy to maintain order and avoid the chaos that a massacre might unleash. After all, ruling a city was a lot easier when its inhabitants weren't plotting your downfall. Now, let's talk numbers because, as any good historian will tell you, the devil is in the details. During the siege, Saladin's army was a formidable force, numbering around 30,000 men. That's a lot of boots, or sandals, on the ground, and keeping them fed and equipped wasn't cheap. It required a steady flow of resources, from food supplies to weaponry, and that meant Saladin had to be as much an economist as a general. His ability to maintain such a large force speaks to his organizational skills and his knack for logistics, not just his prowess on the battlefield. Economics played a crucial role in Saladin's chivalrous image. By controlling trade routes and ensuring the economic stability of his territories, he was able to project an aura of stability and prosperity. This, in turn, reinforced his reputation as a benevolent ruler, one who could provide for his people and maintain peace in a region that was anything but peaceful. But while Saladin's chivalry was often strategic, it wasn't all smoke and mirrors. He genuinely believed in the principles of justice and mercy, rooted in his Islamic faith. He was known to have released prisoners without ransom, a move that would make even the most hardened cynic raise an eyebrow. His policies often reflected a genuine desire to be seen as a fair and just ruler, even if they also served his political interests. In the end, Saladin's legendary chivalry was a blend of genuine virtue and calculated strategy. He was a leader who understood the power of perception, a master of both the sword and the story. While pop culture's portrayal of him as the perfect knight might be a bit romanticized, it doesn't entirely miss the mark. Saladin was a complex figure, a man who walked the fine line between myth and reality with the skill of a tightrope walker. As we prepare to delve further into Saladin's saga, keep in mind that the legend of Saladin is as much about the man himself as it is about the stories that have been told about him. In a world where legends were born as much from the pen as the sword, Saladin's tale is a testament to the enduring power of narrative. So, as we continue to explore his legacy, remember that every story has more than one side, and sometimes the truth is even more fascinating than the myth. So, we've got Saladin, the medieval maestro, skillfully juggling legend and reality like a circus performer with flaming swords. But let's shift the spotlight from the man to the machine, specifically the Ayyubid Empire's inner workings under Saladin's meticulous eye. You might think administration sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry, but hold onto your turbans. This is where the real magic happened. Picture the Ayyubid Empire as a colossal game of Jenga. One wrong move, and the whole thing could topple. Yet, Saladin managed to keep the blocks stacked by orchestrating a symphony of administrators, traders, and tax collectors who were as vital as any sword-wielding knight. You see, conquering lands is one thing. Governing them without setting your empire on fire is another. Saladin understood this delicate dance. Let's start with taxes because, let's face it, even in the 12th century, nothing was certain except death and taxes. Saladin wasn't just in it for the glory. He needed cold, hard cash to keep his empire afloat. The man had an army to pay and an empire to run. So, he structured a tax system that was both efficient and, dare I say, innovative. His administration levied taxes not just on land, but also on trade and produce, ensuring a steady cash flow. Take the Kharaj tax, for example. It was a land tax levied on non-Muslim subjects, a common practice in Islamic empires. The rates varied, but typically it was about 10% of the produce. This wasn't just a money grab. It was a way to integrate diverse populations into the empire's economic system. Saladin was the original tax and spend ruler, using the revenue to fund everything from military campaigns to public works. And speaking of trade, let's not underestimate the importance of those dusty trade routes crisscrossing the empire. These were the medieval highways of commerce, the veins through which the lifeblood of the empire, goods, ideas, and culture, flowed. Saladin's administration recognized the value of these routes and worked tirelessly to protect and maintain them. We're talking about ensuring the safety of caravans, regulating trade tariffs, and even building caravanserais, those medieval motels for weary traders and their camels. Now, let's talk logistics. Moving an army isn't just a matter of pointing and shouting, "Charge." It's more like herding cats, if the cats were armed and needed to be fed, clothed, and paid. Saladin's logistics network was a marvel of medieval engineering. His administrators worked like clockwork to ensure that supplies reached the front lines. They were the unsung heroes, the ones without whom the glorious battles would have been little more than chaotic melees. Consider this. A typical army on the move could consume upwards of 10,000 pounds of grain a day. That's like feeding a small town every single day while on the march. Saladin's empire had to ensure surplus production in key grain-producing regions, like the fertile Nile Delta, a process that required foresight and careful planning. But let's not forget the legal system, the glue holding this sprawling empire together. Saladin's administration implemented a legal framework that was both flexible and robust, based largely on Islamic law or Sharia. He appointed cadis, or judges, to oversee legal matters in cities and towns. These judges ensured that justice was dispensed fairly, or at least as fairly as one could hope in a time when disputes could involve anything from stolen goats to land ownership. One of the standout elements of Saladin's administration was his use of iktas, a form of land grant. An ikta was like a feudal fief, granted to military commanders or local leaders in exchange for service. This system was a masterstroke of economic and military policy, rewarding loyalty while ensuring local governance. The ikta holders were responsible for collecting taxes and maintaining order, a task that freed up Saladin's central administration to focus on broader strategic concerns. But what's a good strategy without good people? Behind every great leader is a team of bureaucrats who make sure the empire doesn't implode. Saladin surrounded himself with advisors who were as adept at handling papyrus scrolls as they were at brandishing swords. Figures like Al-Qadi al-Fadl, Saladin's chief secretary, were instrumental in running the day-to-day operations of the empire and ensuring that Saladin's grand vision didn't get bogged down in the minutiae. Yet, the success of the Ayyubid administration wasn't just about efficient governance or strategic brilliance. It was about understanding the social fabric of the empire. Saladin had to navigate a diverse population, with Muslims, Christians, and Jews all living within his borders. He understood that stability came through tolerance and inclusion, not just force. This wasn't some modern-day diversity initiative, but a practical approach to governance. By allowing different communities to maintain their cultural and religious practices, Saladin ensured that they felt vested in the empire's success. In the end, Saladin's empire was like a well-oiled machine, humming along thanks to a combination of savvy economic policies, strategic military logistics, and a legal system that kept the peace. It was a complex tapestry woven together by unsung heroes who understood that the true power of an empire lay not just in its might, but in its ability to sustain itself. As we delve deeper into this saga, remember that behind every legendary leader is an army of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And as much as we'd like to think it's all about the battles and the glory, sometimes the real story lies in the mundane, but crucial, details of governance. Stay tuned, because the Ayyubid Empire still has a few more surprises up its historical sleeve. So, as we peel back the layers of Saladin's administration, it's clear the man was more than just a charismatic conqueror. He was a maestro of medieval management. But let's fast forward a bit to 1193, the year Saladin bid adieu to this mortal coil. For the Ayyubid Empire, it was like the moment the conductor leaves the orchestra. You might think, how hard can it be to keep playing the same tune? But without Saladin's baton, it turns out, quite hard indeed. On March 4, 1193, Saladin died in Damascus, leaving behind an empire that was as much a tapestry of tributes as it was a web of alliances. And just like any good soap opera, the plot thickened with a succession crisis. Picture a family dinner that dissolves into chaos when the patriarch's will is read, only this was no sitcom. Saladin had left the empire divided among his sons and relatives like a medieval opera. You get a sultanate, and you get a sultanate. Which, spoiler alert, didn't exactly lead to brotherly love. Saladin's eldest son, Al-Afdal, inherited Damascus, but he soon discovered that running an empire was more complicated than a game of Risk. Meanwhile, Al-Aziz, the second son, took control of Egypt. The youngest, Al-Zahir, received Aleppo. It was a political juggling act with flaming torches, and none of Saladin's heirs had quite the dexterity required. In a move that could only be described as the medieval version of sibling rivalry, the brothers squabbled over territories like kids fighting over the last slice of pizza. This internal strife left the Ayyubid territories vulnerable, and like sharks smelling blood in the water, external forces started circling. The Crusaders, never ones to miss an opportunity, saw a chance to regain lost ground. But the real wild card here was not the Crusaders. It was the Mamluks, those military slaves who had been the backbone of Saladin's army. They were the unsung heroes who'd carried the day at battles like Hattin, and now they saw an opportunity to step into the spotlight. By the early 13th century, the Mamluks had started to throw their weight around, and by 1250, they were done playing second fiddle. They overthrew the Ayyubid ruler in Egypt, marking the rise of the Mamluk Sultanate. Think of them as the medieval version of a corporate takeover, but instead of hostile board meetings, it was all swords and sieges. Mamluks were a force to be reckoned with, and they knew it. They were like that band member who finally goes solo and turns out to be a rock star in their own right. But before you start thinking this was the end of Saladin's legacy, let's take a step back. While his empire fragmented, the cultural and political influences he set in motion continued to ripple through the Middle East. Saladin's insistence on Sunni orthodoxy laid the groundwork for the future Islamic empires, while his policy of inclusivity left a lasting impression on the region's religious and cultural tapestry. The Ayyubid Empire may have crumbled, but Saladin's reputation was as indestructible as his castles. His legacy lived on, not just in the bricks and mortar of his architectural achievements, but in the stories and myths that continue to inspire generations. Here was a man whose image was so potent, even his enemies couldn't help but admire him. He became a symbol of chivalry, a beacon of justice, and a model of leadership that transcended the centuries. Even today, his world echoes in surprising ways. Take the concept of jihad, which Saladin redefined during his reign. Unlike the modern, often misappropriated interpretations, Saladin's jihad was about defensive warfare and the protection of the Muslim community. It was a unifying force, a call to arms that brought together disparate factions under a single banner. His approach was less about conquest and more about consolidation, a nuance often lost in today's soundbite-driven narratives. In the realm of pop culture, Saladin's image is still larger than life, featuring in everything from epic poems to video games. He's a staple in the annals of literature and cinema, often portrayed as the noble adversary or the sage ruler. Whether it's in the romanticized tales of the Crusades or the modern-day retellings, Saladin remains a figure who captivates the imagination, a testament to his enduring allure. So, what do we take away from this saga of Saladin and his empire? Perhaps it's a reminder that history is not just a series of events, but a collection of stories, each with its own heroes and villains, myths and realities. Saladin's story is a rich tapestry of ambition and strategy, of dreams and disillusionment, woven together by the threads of human nature itself. It shows us that while empires may fall, the ideas and ideals they champion can outlive stone and mortar, echoing through time in ways both profound and unexpected. In the end, Saladin's legacy is as much about the power of narrative as it is about the man himself. His life is a testament to the enduring strength of leadership forged in the crucible of conflict and the complexities of human ambition. As we close this chapter, remember that history, much like life, is a tapestry of contradictions and complexities, where the truth is often as fascinating as the legend. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's what makes it all so endlessly captivating. If you've ever imagined medieval life as a 24/7 banquet straight of a Game of Thrones set piece, then it's time for a reality check. Sure, the upper crust had their lavish feasts, but let's not pretend every meal was a royal affair. For most folks back in the Middle Ages, dining resembled more of a survival exercise than a culinary exploration. Forget about endless tables groaning under the weight of glistening roasts and flagons of wine. Instead, think of pottage, glorified vegetable stew, and lots of it. This was the medieval equivalent of instant ramen, and trust me, it wasn't because they were health conscious. Now, let's talk economics, because what's a snack without a price tag? To set the scene, a loaf of bread might cost you a whole day's wages if you were a peasant. That's right, your average Joe or Jane was shelling out the medieval equivalent of a venti caramel macchiato just to slap together a sandwich. And that's before we even get into the good stuff. If you managed to get your grubby mitts on some meat, it was likely because someone else couldn't eat it. This was back when refrigeration meant sticking your leftovers in a drafty corner, and food safety standards were more of a suggestion than a rule. Now, what did people actually snack on? Enter the humble pottage. This was a one-part wonder that everyone from peasant to pauper could whip up with whatever they had on hand. No two porridges were alike, kind of like snowflakes, but less poetic and more, well, edible. You'd have grains, vegetables, maybe some fish if you lived near the coast or a river, but meat was rare unless you were celebrating something special, like a wedding or the king not raising taxes again. It's like an episode of Chopped, but with less drama and more existential dread. And speaking of taxes, the economic landscape was a minefield that could make or break your meal plans. The feudal system was all about hierarchies, and if you were at the bottom, let's just say your dining options were limited. The lords and ladies might enjoy imported spices and exotic fruits, but for most villagers, those were as distant as a fairy tale. It didn't help that the Black Death came along in the mid-1300 and made everything even more complicated. Supply chains were about as reliable as a teenager's promise to clean their room, so people had to make do with what they could grow or trade locally. Let's not forget the thrill of street food, medieval style. Picture bustling markets where you could grab a quick bite on your way to, well, not much since most folks didn't travel far from home. Those markets sold pies. Yes, the original fast food. These weren't your Instagram-worthy pies, but more like a pocket of dough stuffed with whatever was left over from last night's dinner. If you were lucky, it was still good. If not, well, at least it was warm. Medieval life was more about making it through the day than living in the lap of luxury. Sure, the romantic lure of a night's banquet persists, but the truth is, many people were just trying to keep their bellies from rumbling too loudly in church. Snack culture wasn't about indulgence. It was about necessity. It was about using every scrap, every grain, every questionable vegetable to stave off hunger for just a little while longer. And if you're wondering, no one was counting calories. They were counting blessings when their stomachs were full. The allure of medieval feasting is strong, mostly because it's narrated by the winners, the ones who could afford to throw a party and call it Tuesday. But the real story, the one less told, is of the everyday nibbles that kept the majority going. Behind every legendary banquet was a kitchen full of cooks, each with their own hacks and shortcuts to make sure the next meal wasn't their last. So, the next time you grab a bag of chips or a protein bar, remember you're taking part in a tradition that's as old as time. The only difference, we've got a little more choice these days. Now, while we're reminiscing about the culinary adventures of medieval peasants, let's take a stroll through a medieval market where the real magic, or chaos, depending on your perspective, happened. If you think Black Friday sales are hectic, you haven't seen anything yet. Medieval markets were the original supermalls, minus the air conditioning, and with a lot more livestock wandering about. Picture a bustling square crammed with stalls, each competing for your attention with everything from the scent of fresh-baked bread to the not-so-fresh aroma of fish that had seen better days. This was the medieval marketplace, a chaotic symphony of sights, sounds, and yes, smells. Vendors hawked their goods with the gusto of modern-day infomercial hosts. And what were they selling? Well, it wasn't all about survival food like pottage, believe it or not. There were some genuine treats to be found if you had the coin. Candied fruits, for example, were the medieval equivalent of a sugar rush, made with honey or, on rare occasions, imported sugar, which was literally worth its weight in gold. Imagine buying a single ounce of sugar for the same price as a sheep. Yes, you heard that right, an entire woolly sheep. And then there was ale, the medieval multitasker. It quenched your thirst, fueled your social life, and most importantly, killed off the bacteria in the questionable water supply. Ale was so integral that some people consumed it more than water. It was like a medieval smoothie, except with a lot more malt and a lot less kale. Even kids drank it, albeit a weaker version, because nothing says responsible parenting quite like giving your toddler a pint. But these markets weren't just about buying and selling. They were the social media of their day, a place to catch up on gossip, eye the competition, and maybe even find a spouse. You see, in a world without Tinder, sometimes you just had to hope for a meet-cute over a wheel of cheese. However, if you were a vendor, the market was your battleground. You had to be savvy, knowing when to barter, when to hold firm, and when to cut your losses and transform those overripe apples into cider. Let's not forget the logistics that got these goods from field to table. The medieval supply chain was a Herculean task of its own. Transport wasn't exactly efficient. Forget about overnight shipping or tracking numbers. Goods traveled via horse-drawn carts or, if you were fortunate, by riverboat. This was a time when the phrase, fresh off the boat, actually meant something, because the longer your goods took to arrive, the higher the chance they'd be greeted with an unpleasant aroma. Now, let's talk about freshness. Today, we're spoiled by the luxury of farm-to-table dining, where the biggest concern is whether your greens are organic. Back then, fresh was a relative term. Medieval freshness was more about avoiding outright spoilage, which could strike faster than you can say expiration date. With the absence of refrigeration, everything was a race against time, and food preservation techniques like salting, smoking, and pickling were less about flavor and more about survival. Meat could be hung in a cool, drafty castle corridor, but that was a luxury only the privileged could afford. For the average market-goer, it was more like, eat it before it grows fur. Furthermore, the market scene was a direct reflection of the medieval economy, which was as predictable as a cat on catnip. Prices fluctuated wildly depending on the season, harvest success, and even political stability, or the lack thereof. If you were a peasant, this meant gambling with your dinner plans, hoping that a bad harvest didn't coincide with an unexpected tax increase. And if you were a merchant, you were constantly keeping one eye on the market and the other on the weather, because a sudden storm could turn your shipment into a soggy disaster. Of course, the allure of the market wasn't just about the goods, it was about the experience. It was a place where you could see a juggler perform, hear a minstrel sing, or watch a knight try to haggle over the price of a pig. This was reality TV before television existed, a live-action drama where everyone had a role to play. The market was the heartbeat of medieval life, where the mundane met the extraordinary, and where, for a few hours, you could escape the grind of daily existence. So, the next time you find yourself grumbling about a trip to the grocery store, remember the medieval market. It was a place where food wasn't just eaten but experienced, where every purchase was a gamble, and every bite was a testament to the art of making do. And as we leave this bustling scene, let's not forget that it was here, in the chaos and clamor, that the seeds of our modern food culture were sown. We're just lucky we can now enjoy those seeds without worrying about the plague or an errant horse cart. But don't get too comfortable. There's more to explore in our medieval journey, so stay tuned as we continue to unravel the quirks and customs of a time long past. As we journey further into the world of medieval munchies, let's take a closer look at the real stars of the show. Sugar and spices. These weren't just ingredients. They were status symbols, the medieval equivalent of driving a flashy sports car or owning the latest smartphone. Imagine walking into a feast and casually mentioning that your dessert features imported sugar and a dash of cinnamon from the Far East. You'd be the talk of the town, or at least the talk of those who could afford to care. Sugar, in particular, was a game changer. We're not talking the kind you pick up at your local supermarket for a couple of bucks. Back in the Middle Ages, sugar was as exclusive as it was expensive. We're talking upwards of 3 shillings per pound in the 13th century, which in today's money could buy you several decent meals, or more realistically, a Netflix subscription for a few months. The allure of sugar was so potent that people were willing to pay the price of a sheep for just a handful. It was the kind of extravagance that made your neighbors both envious and suspicious of your financial decisions. But why the hefty price tag? Well, sugar didn't exactly grow on trees in Europe. It had to be imported from places like India and the Middle East, enduring a perilous journey across land and sea. Each step of the way, its value increased exponentially, making it a luxury only the wealthy could afford. And just like today's designer brands, part of its appeal lay in its scarcity. The more difficult it was to obtain, the more desirable it became. Sugar was the ultimate sweet status symbol, often showcased in elaborate displays at feasts to signal wealth and sophistication. Now, spices were no different in their allure. Picture this, a tiny jar of saffron costing more than a cow. Why? Because spices had to travel thousands of miles from the mysterious lands of the East, passing through countless hands before making their way to a medieval pantry. Each hand added its own markup, making spices worth their weight in gold, sometimes quite literally. Black pepper, for instance, was so valuable that it was used as currency, a sort of edible Bitcoin of the Middle Ages. It was a time when peppercorns could pay a dowry or settle a debt, and a pinch of cinnamon could elevate a dish from mundane to magnificent. But let's not kid ourselves. Spices weren't just about showing off. They served a very practical purpose, masking the taste of less-than-fresh food. With preservation techniques that were more hit or miss than a game of darts in a blackout, medieval cooks relied on spices to transform dubious meats into palatable meals. A sprinkle of nutmeg here, a dash of clove there, and voila! Last week's mutton could be passed off as today's gourmet dish. It was culinary alchemy at its finest, turning potential disaster into delight. Of course, this wasn't lost on the chefs of the time, who wielded spices like magical potions, each one with the power to disguise and delight. The social implications of spice consumption were profound. In a world where your social rank was often as rigid as the crust on a day-old loaf of bread, spices were a way to display your importance without saying a word. They were culinary bling, a way to show that you not only had wealth, but also the connections to acquire such exotic goods. It was a culinary hierarchy where the menu spoke volumes about your place in society. The more exotic your dish, the higher you stood on the social ladder. And while cinnamon, ginger, and cloves were the darlings of medieval cuisine, they also carried with them tales of adventure and exploration. Each spice was a whisper of the distant lands it came from, sparking imaginations and inspiring tales of daring voyages and exotic encounters. They were a reminder that beyond the borders of one's village or town lay a world full of mystery and wonder, waiting to be discovered. However, all this glamour had its downsides. The spice trade was a risky business, fraught with danger and deception. Pirates roamed the seas, ready to relieve a ship of its precious cargo, and merchants faced the constant threat of wars and political turmoil disrupting their routes. It was a high-stakes game where fortunes could be made or lost on the turn of a tide. The allure of spices was not just in their flavor, but in the adventure and peril that brought them to the table. Yet despite the risks, the demand for sugar and spices continued to grow. They became embedded in the fabric of medieval life, influencing everything from trade routes to social customs. Spices were not just a culinary choice. They were a statement. They said, "I've arrived, and I have the pepper to prove it." As we leave the world of medieval seasonings, remember that the next time you casually sprinkle some cinnamon on your latte or toss a pinch of saffron into your paella, you're partaking in a tradition that has spanned centuries. You're not just adding flavor, you're adding a touch of history to your meal. And while we may take these ingredients for granted today, in the Middle Ages, they were the stuff of dreams, a taste of the exotic, and a testament to the adventurous spirit of those who dared to bring the world to their dinner table. So, as we continue our medieval culinary journey, keep your eyes peeled for the next installment, where we'll delve even deeper into the quirks and customs that shaped the diets of the past. There's still much to uncover, and plenty of surprises await as we unravel the fascinating tapestry of history, one bite at a time. And as we journey further into the tapestry of medieval life, let's peel back the layers of those so-called hearty meals that history textbooks love to romanticize. Because, spoiler alert, the reality was less feast fit for a king and more meal barely fit for a mouse. Sure, we've been fed tall tales of knights chowing down on turkey, legs the size of their swords, but the truth was a smorgasbord of deficiencies that would make a nutritionist today clutch their multivitamins in horror. First up, let's tackle the myth of meat. While it's true that medieval banquets occasionally featured roasted beasts, your average peasant was more likely to see a unicorn than a steak on their plate. Meat was a luxury, a rare treat for the special occasions that dotted the calendar. Think weddings, baptisms, or the occasional hooray, we survived another winter party. For the rest of the time, folks were stuck with gruel pottage and the occasional fish if they lived somewhere near water. Forget surf and turf. It was more like pond and pottage. Now, if you're wondering why everyone wasn't walking around with scurvy and rickets, well, plot twist, they often were. With a diet heavy on carbs and light on, well, everything else, nutritional deficiencies were as common as medieval mud. The lack of vitamin C led to scurvy, a condition famous for turning your gums into a bleeding horror show and leaving you with all the energy of a slug on a hot sidewalk. Sailors get all the scurvy press, but plenty of landlubbers were also popping teeth like tic-tacs due to their citrus-free diets. Rickets was another uninvited guest at the medieval dinner table. This bone-crippling disease, caused by a deficiency in vitamin D, meant that many children grew up with deformities. It's like their bones were made of medieval bread dough, bending and twisting in all the wrong ways. And no, drinking ale didn't help, though it might have made people care a little less about the state of their skeletons. Now, you might be thinking, surely vegetables saved the day. Well, not quite. While veggies were indeed on the menu, they were often overcooked to the point of oblivion. So, any nutrients that might have stood a fighting chance were boiled away like they were in witness protection. It's like the medieval version of steamed broccoli that spent one too many minutes in the sauna. The medieval diet, in short, was a balancing act between what was available and what wouldn't poison you. People were more concerned with avoiding food that was outright dangerous than they were with ensuring they got their daily recommended dose of leafy greens. This wasn't a world of kale smoothies and acai bowls. It was more like, does this pottage smell okay? Good, let's eat. But why the dietary doom and gloom? Well, a lot of it boiled down to the socio-economic merry-go-round that was medieval life. The feudal system ensured that wealth, and thus access to the good stuff, was concentrated in the hands of the few. If you were at the bottom of the social ladder, you might have been lucky to own a ladder at all, let alone one to climb up. Peasants were more often hungering after landowners' leftovers than they were looking forward to a balanced meal. The economics of medieval eating were as unbalanced as a three-legged stool. Bread, the staple of any medieval diet, was a commodity of its own. Prices could skyrocket depending on the weather, harvests, and the whim of local lords. A failed harvest could mean choosing between bread and, well, more bread, because there wasn't much else on offer, and good luck adding a side of veggies when your entire village's cabbage crop was wiped out by a particularly enthusiastic slug infestation. So, what did all this mean for the average medieval Joe or Jane? It meant living on the edge, nutritionally speaking. While the upper classes were busy worrying about which spice to flaunt at their next banquet, the lower classes were just trying to make it through the day without keeling over from lack of essential vitamins. It was a world where survival wasn't guaranteed, and your diet was more about what you could find rather than what you fancied. The romantic image of the hearty medieval meal is as much a fabrication as a Hollywood love story. While the upper classes may have indulged in occasional extravagance, the rest were left to scrape by with whatever they could cultivate, scavenge, or trade. They weren't counting calories. They were counting on making it through another season without famine or pestilence knocking at their door. And let's not forget the ever-present specter of foodborne illness. With food preservation methods that were as reliable as a politician's promise, medieval folks had to be wary of what they ate. Spoiled meat, contaminated water, and dodgy dairy could turn a meal into a medieval nightmare faster than you could say, pass the salt. The lack of modern hygiene standards meant that food poisoning was a frequent, if unwelcome, dinner guest. Yet, despite these challenges, people persevered. They adapted, improvised, and sometimes even thrived in a landscape where nutrition was more hope than science. And while the myths of medieval feasting continue to enchant us, the reality was a testament to human resilience in the face of adversity. The medieval diet was a story of survival, of making do with what you had, and of finding joy in the simple act of sharing a meal, no matter how humble. So, as we wrap up this leg of our journey, remember that the next time you indulge in a feast or enjoy a snack, you're standing on the shoulders of those who navigated a much more perilous culinary landscape. And as we move forward, we'll continue to explore the quirks and customs that shape the diets of the past, revealing the truths that lie beneath the myths we've come to hold dear. Stay tuned for more, because the story of medieval munchies is far from over. As we wrap up our medieval culinary journey, it's time to chew on the legacy of those bygone banquets and everyday feasts. Because, believe it or not, the seeds of our modern snacking habits were planted right back there in those bustling medieval markets and drafty castle kitchens. Minus the dragons and damsels, of course. The medieval quest for tasty, affordable, and convenient food was a precursor to our current love affair with junk food. Yes, our ancestors were the original snack aficionados, even if their idea of a treat was a tad more rustic than a packet of nacho cheese Doritos. First, let's draw a line from medieval street food to our modern fast food culture. Picture those pies from the market stalls of yore, stuffed with whatever was left over from last night's feast. They were essentially the original Heart Pockets, quick, on-the-go meals that were as portable as they were unpredictable. Fast forward a few hundred years, And you've got the birth of the fast food industry in the 20th century, serving up burgers and fries with a side of efficiency. The convenience factor is timeless. Whether it's a meat pie or a cheeseburger, the goal has always been to satisfy hunger without the hassle. Now, if you've ever marveled at the global phenomenon that is the potato chip, then you're witnessing the evolution of snack culture that began with medieval nibbles. Back then, when salt was worth its weight in gold, it was used to preserve food and add flavor to otherwise bland diets. Today, salt remains the king of seasonings, elevating humble potatoes to snack stardom. The appeal of salt hasn't changed. What has changed is our ability to mass-produce it and sprinkle it liberally on everything from chips to popcorn. This is snack evolution in action, folks, from salted meat to salt-laden snacks. And let's not forget sugar, the sweet siren that lured medieval aristocrats into paying sheep-sized prices for a taste. Today, sugar is as ubiquitous as air, but its allure remains the same. It's the reason we have entire aisles in supermarkets dedicated to candy and desserts. The medieval craving for sugar mirrors our modern-day sweet tooth, proving that some things never change. We've just made it more accessible, trading in gold coins for loose change to satisfy our cravings. But why does this matter? What's the significance of tracing our snacking habits back to medieval times? Well, it tells us a lot about human nature. Quest for indulgence, for a little bit of luxury in the midst of the mundane, is as old as time. It underscores a universal truth. People have always sought comfort and joy in food, whether it was a rare spice in a medieval stew or the latest flavor of chips. Food has always been about more than sustenance. It's about experience, culture, and a shared sense of humanity. Now, let's talk economics, because medieval times weren't all about the romance of feasting. The economic landscape played a huge role in shaping food culture. Back then, the disparity in food access mirrored the social hierarchy, and while we've come a long way, echoes of that system still exist. Today, we have food deserts and gourmet grocers, a modern twist on the old divide between the lord's table and the peasant's pottage. Understanding this link helps us see that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Socially and politically, food has always been a reflection of power dynamics. In medieval times, spices and sugar were the playgrounds of the wealthy, a way to flaunt status and influence. Today, food trends and diets can still signify status, whether it's the latest superfood or the exclusive restaurant you post about on Instagram. The politics of food are alive and well, just a little more Instagrammable than before. And let's not sidestep the harsh realities of preservation, because if medieval folks taught us anything, it's that necessity is the mother of invention. The medieval methods of salting, smoking, and pickling were born out of survival, and they paved the way for today's preservation techniques. From your grandma's pickles to your artisanal charcuterie board, these age-old practices have evolved but remain essential, illustrating how medieval ingenuity has shaped modern culinary arts. So, as we close this chapter on medieval munchies, remember that our love for snacks is a shared thread weaving through history. From the bustling market stalls to the aisles of your local store, the quest for tasty, affordable, and convenient food is a testament to our shared humanity. It's a reminder that while the flavors and forms may change, our desire for a little indulgence remains as strong as ever. In essence, medieval food culture laid the groundwork for our current food habits, proving that the love for junk food is as timeless as it is tasty. Whether you're munching on a bag of chips or savoring a candy bar, know that you're part of a long-standing tradition of finding joy in the simple pleasures of food. And as you enjoy your next snack, give a nod to those medieval trailblazers who paved the way with their pies and pottage. After all, history isn't just something you read about, it's something you taste, one bite at a time.